Hey there, welcome back to Bedtime Chills. Tonight, we're sharing true scary stories with gentle rain and thunder in the background, perfect for relaxing and drifting off to sleep. Hit that like button, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. New viewers, tell us where you're tuning in from. Now, let's dive into these spine-chilling tales together. This is actually my stepmom's and her best friend's story. I have my own, but I'm so hesitant to drag some of them up. I'm hoping telling someone else's will open me up a little more. My stepmom didn't like us much, but she told my sister, 3 years older, and me this experience growing up to scare us out of being reckless. It was my family's stranger danger story. My stepmom, we're going to call her Macy, grew up as a privileged teen in the 70s, and her mom had moved their family over here, the States, from England when she was about 9. She went to a pretty nice high school in a really nice town. There, she made friends with a girl, Lily, who didn't exactly run with Macy's type of crowd, popular, stereotypical, etc. They really hit it off, and Lily would take Macy out to do her type of stuff, hiking, fishing, and sailing. There's even a hilarious set of pictures of them camping. My stepmom has raccoon eyes and looks like she hates everything. Anyways, because of Lily's influence, the two of them would do stuff like that a good amount. One Sunday, they decided to go hike in some hills about an hour away. Macy put on what I'm sure were her extremely expensive hiking shoes, and the two of them drove off to the hiking trails. Lily parked in this big clearing with makeshift parking spots, like a piece of wood marking the head of a space, but there were no other cars there. This was only important in hindsight. They started hiking up the hill, off the path, because Lily fancied herself as something of a daredevil. The hike was nothing extraordinary. If you asked my stepmom, she would just lament for 15 minutes how sticky and buggy it was. Anyways, they reached the top of the hill, and my stepmom was done. The polished, pampered side of her was coming out, and she groaned until Lily, begrudgingly, said, "Okay." They would rest and then walk down again, slower. They had been heading down the hill for maybe 10 minutes when Macy started complaining again. Lily conceded to walking down the side of the road instead of the rough hiking trail. So there they are, probably looking like a couple of tools geared up for hiking and walking down a crappy road, and after not even 5 minutes, a truck pulled up next to them. It was red and rusty and just generally looked like a clunker. The guy driving rolled down the window, and the girls looked in through the passenger's side window. He had a big beard, a baseball cap pulled down, and long brown hair. He greeted them and even smiled through his beard, asking if they needed a ride. Macy described him as charming and even cute. Lily still says the moment he greeted them her hackles went up. Despite her better judgment, my stepmom convinced her to get in the truck. It must only be a 10-minute drive down to the car, tops. The two girls opened the passenger's door to this rusty old thing, and the guy directed them behind the seat to get into the back. They settled in, and the truck started rumbling forward. Lily always says that was the point it hit her what a mistake they had just made. The back seat was clean enough, but there was a rope on the floor behind the driver's seat and 4 boxes of saran wrap half hanging out from under the passenger's seat. It seemed creepy and weird, but Lily didn't want to freak my stepmom out, so she just kept her mouth shut. After 10 minutes, the woods didn't look any clearer, and they hadn't seen another car the whole time. Lily asked how long he thought it would be. He said he was taking a different route down the hill and had to stop somewhere to get something first. That was it. The girls were 16, 17, and Lily didn't want to press the issue. She was scared. She can remember his hair because she was sitting behind him. He looked like a woodsy guy, but his hair was super tangled and dirty. She noticed crusted mud on his collar and tried to find something identifiable about him, but just got scared the more she picked up on little details. He was youngish, strong-looking, and had a significant height advantage on both of them. So they didn't ask any more questions, and he didn't offer any information, and they drove on. Several minutes after that, they reached a tiny shack log cabin looking place right there in a clearing of trees. There was an old stump where someone had been chopping wood and a huge axe stuck into the log. Lily was definitely on red alert now. The guy turned off the truck and slipped out of it, saying, "I'll be right back. Don't get out." And he disappeared into the house. Lily tried to talk to my stepmom about how she was incredibly uncomfortable, but she mostly just dismissed it. Lily started begging, increasingly freaked out, and finally put her foot down, demanding Macy exit the truck with her. So they got out and walked around the front of the vehicle. The house was about 50 yards in front of them. Why this guy would have left two young girls in the truck alone while going into the house is beyond me, and they wandered around, looking at it hesitantly. If this guy really was decent and just trying to give them a ride, it would be super rude to just run off, right? My stepmom had this strict upbringing when it came to manners and a public persona, and she saw it as an issue of that nature, so she actually started to head back to the truck, opening the front door to climb in behind the driver's seat. Lily was angry and followed her to argue some more. On the driver's side floor, half hidden under the seat, there was a big hatchet. It had dry red-brown stains covering the blade and stuck to the floor under it. Lily understandably lost her composure, and seeing it, my stepmom started getting hysterical. They decided that leaving was by far their best option at this point, and just booked it off the side of the property into the trees. They bumbled around in the trees for a little while until Lily was fairly confident they were on their way back down the hill. My stepmom cried all the way down. Lily felt bad about it, but was also completely freaked out that he would hear it and kept trying to calm her down. When they finally got back down to the bottom and saw the old wooden fence that surrounded the original parking area, they were relieved. But as they got closer, they saw it. The truck. It was parked on the other side of the gravelly makeshift lot. Just sitting there, facing the other way innocently. They couldn't see if anyone was in it, and of course, Macy wanted to run for the car, but Lily was super hesitant. She managed to calm my stepmom down, saying she wanted to wait before running out into the open to see what was out there. Remember, this is the 70s. No cell phones. There was no ranger station or anyone around. The parking lot was big and empty and open, and who knows what would have happened if they decided to stroll across it. Thankfully, Lily convinced my stepmom to chill, and the two of them hunkered down against a big tree, hidden by bushes and other trees, and waited out for what seemed to be a couple of hours until dark started to fall. All the animals started coming out and making noises, and my stepmom, predictably, started getting antsy about this and bothering Lily, who was tired and moments away from giving in. She was just planning their dash to the car when they heard a clunk. Across the twilight-lit lot, they watched as one of the back doors of their car swung open, and the bearded guy slid his way out of the back seat. He got out, shut the door, looked around at the surrounding woods for several moments, and then walked back to his truck. The truck lumbered past their car and out of sight. Several minutes after watching him drive away, they sprinted to their car as fast as they could, jumped in, and peeled out before they had even shut the doors. This was an experience I had alongside my best friend in high school around 2006 or 2007 in rural upstate New York. We met in 3rd grade and have remained friends ever since. We're both 27 now. Let me give you some background information. My friend, B, and I became instant friends in 3rd grade and were inseparable. We spent so much time at each other's homes that her mom set up her guest room as my room, complete with toys, clothes, and pictures. I was treated like family. Pictures of B and me hung on the walls of her home, owned by her very proud mother, Shelley. Shelley always wanted 2 daughters and loved me so much that she considered me her second daughter. Now onto the main story. This incident happened when B and I were sophomores in high school. Her mother was divorced and dated a few different men, meeting some on sites like eHarmony. She had been talking to a man for a few weeks, gushing about how manly and charming he was. She was really excited and always showed us their profiles before deciding to go on a date. She would say, "I need my daughter's stamps of approval." One night, she called us to her room and showed us this man she had been talking about. His profile was simple, as one would expect for a middle-aged man in 2007 on eHarmony. The headline read, "Looking for a strong mother." I made a joke about his odd use of caps and how strange it was to start like that, but we moved on. His profile mentioned his metalwork background, his love of cold steel, and his work in a foundry that kept his icy heart just warm enough. I was honest and told her it sounded off, but he was handsome, sporting black, well-groomed hair, a beard, strong jaw, ice blue eyes, and a relatively fit body for a man in his 40s. I stressed the weird vibe, and B joked about how Shelley always picked out the antisocial ones. We laughed, knowing there was some truth to that. Shelley had brought home some odd stories, but what could you expect from meeting men online? We told her to go for it, so they planned on dinner. It was quite a drive for him, about 2 hours. He drove to our location where they would then take one car into town. B and I helped Shelley pick out her outfit, assisted with her hair and makeup, and then went back upstairs so she could have some time to herself before the long night. We were painting a wall in her room, just listening to music and chatting. He let himself into the house like it was no big deal and came upstairs without saying a word, no knocking, no doorbell. The dogs didn't bark. Nothing. We were spooked, jumped, screamed, and were startled when we heard a man start talking behind us. We didn't know how long he had been in the house, how long he had stood behind us without speaking, but when he did speak, we were shaken. Well, I didn't know I was getting a 2-for-1 deal, he said quietly in a gravelly, low voice. He chuckled as we stood there in shock at the stranger in her room. He sauntered over to us, like a man on a leisurely Sunday stroll. The smell of cigarettes filled the room, as if Rod Serling himself were standing in the corner explaining our situation to the audience for our own personal episode of The Twilight Zone. It was then that I noticed how much this guy looked like the man in the pictures Shelley had shown us, except his hair was salt and pepper, not jet black, and his eyes were not ice blue but black, no brown, just black. It seemed like this guy was 100% pupil. "Are you?" I was interrupted by Shelley shouting, "Who got hurt?" She must have thought we were fooling around and one of us had gotten hurt, normal for us because we goofed around a lot. She was jolted at the sight of this man blocking her from us. He turned around just as soon as she reached the top of the stairs and held his arms out, saying in a much less low tone than before, "Shelley, you look beautiful." I knocked and no one answered. "I hope it's okay I let myself in. These are your girls. They're beautiful, just like their mommy." I'll never forget how he said mommy, it felt wrong. B and I both side-eyed each other and stepped down from our step ladders. We were very in tune with each other. If I felt weird, I knew she did too, and we both sensed the odd atmosphere of the room. Shelley glanced away from him and at us, who were behind him, wide-eyed and shaking our heads in disbelief. Shelley looked back at him, this exchange taking only a few seconds but feeling like an eternity. She forced a smile at him and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, next time just ring the bell, I'll come open the door." He nodded and walked toward her with open arms, hugging her like they had been the oldest of friends. She looked at us as they hugged and rolled her eyes slightly to show us what she thought of his excuse. She proceeded to tell him it was not appropriate as she led him down the stairs, where we heard him apologize over and over. B and I instantly ran to our phones. We agreed to text her mom what he had just said to us so we could tell her without him knowing. We hit send, and about 10 minutes later, we heard footsteps coming up the stairs. It was Shelley, who shut the door behind her and asked us if we were okay. She hugged us and apologized for making us feel uncomfortable. She explained that he had said we reminded him of his girls and didn't mean to scare us. We nodded, and then she said they were leaving for their date. We hugged her, told her to be safe, and that we would see her soon. As she headed down the stairs, B and I looked at each other. We both knew something was not right, but were speechless from the scare we had just received from this dark man about 15 minutes earlier. We heard them walking and talking, heading toward the front door a few minutes later. Shelley shouted up the stairs that she loved us. We yelled back that we loved her, and then the door shut. We instantly started talking over each other, saying the same things. B spoke over me. He laid the charm on so thick as soon as he saw Mom. B exclaimed, "And did you see his eyes? What the heck was that? He looked so much like the guy from the pictures, but not exactly." We both agree on our feelings about the stranger, his scent, his demeanor, his voice. He was like something out of a classic stranger danger advertisement. Again, we agreed to text Shelley how we felt. She thanked us and said it seemed to be going well, and she would let us know that she was safe every hour. B and I were freaked out, and even more so that Shelley was not. It was like a weird spell he had cast on her. It was odd, but we wanted to think the best for Shelley since she was excited about this guy. She texted us every hour until she got home. Her last text said, "I'm okay, but officially freaked out and coming home now. Be home soon." We were worried and paced around until we saw headlights pull into the driveway. It had been about 5 hours since she left and about an hour since that last text. We were inside with the lights off, watching through the side window, trying not to be seen when the motion sensor light flooded the yard and illuminated the driveway. A truck pulled into the driveway. The passenger side door flung open before the truck had fully stopped, and Shelley's feet were on the pavement just as fast. She waved at the driver and kind of jogged to the door, wide-eyed. She reached the front door, turned, and waved the truck off. She had her house key ready in the hand she wasn't waving with. She unlocked the door and slid inside, safely within the house. "Keep the lights off. Let's go upstairs," Shelley said as she locked the 2 deadbolts and the chain, not once looking at us. We followed her upstairs. We walked into B's room and looked out the window down to the truck, still parked out front with the lights on and the engine running. As we all stared at the truck, Shelley told us about the ordeal she had been through. In short, he had made reservations at the wrong restaurant. So he suggested they go buy some food and have a picnic-style dinner at a local park. Shelley didn't do well outdoors. She was an office woman, so she declined. However, he had just driven so long to get here and then hit her with "you kind of owe me." Shelley said that made her feel guilty, knowing he had driven 2 hours, so when he mentioned he had a vacation home nearby where he could cook for her, she agreed. She said they got to the house, and it was nice enough, a log cabin near Bethel, New York, only about 35 minutes from our town. Shelley said he kept talking about how easy it was to get her alone. He also kept saying he liked strong mommies because they have such fight, but she caved. This made her skin crawl. This wasn't the man she thought he was. This also wasn't the man in the picture, and Shelley started to slowly realize this. Shelley then said she asked for a ride home because she was feeling ill. He wasn't happy, but he complied and stopped cooking and started looking for the keys she knew he had in his pocket. He then started asking her about her girls, referring to myself and B. This freaked Shelley out so much that she said she was going to call someone to pick her up, and he didn't like that. He found his keys instantly. Once they were out of the house and in the truck wouldn't start. So they had to move to his work truck. Shelley was visibly shaken and couldn't take her eyes off the truck in the driveway as she rushed through telling us the story. She said there was a garage that they had to walk around the house to get to the work truck. She felt she had no choice but to play it cool and just agree to go. She got out and walked around the house, and there was indeed another garage with a truck in it, the same truck we were all currently staring at, sitting in the driveway. It smelled like bleach and metal, Shelley whispered. She told us that on the way home, he kept asking about us, what we did that she didn't like, what got us in trouble, what naughty things we did, what she would do without us, and the one question that would scare any parent, would you sacrifice yourself for our girls? Shelley said she stared at him in awe and disbelief. And then he just laughed. She got more and more concerned as she noticed her surroundings in the back of the truck she was riding home in. There were what she thought were chains and a bucket sitting on a desk bolted to the floor, a duffel bag, and very large metal objects she wasn't sure about. This is when he started to pull out pictures on his little flip phone that he had of us. He must have found Shelley's Facebook and taken pictures of our pictures, which he had on his phone. He waved it around, telling Shelley what a good strong mommy she had been to us and that she should be proud of what she had accomplished. By this time, they were pulling into the driveway, and Shelley had had enough of his nonsense. She was nearly finished when we saw the truck lights turn off. Shelley immediately picked up the phone and dialed the sheriff, quickly explaining that there was an unwelcome person outside our home. Being in such a small town, the sheriff not only went to school with Shelley and graduated with her, but also lived just 3 doors down. Just as we saw this guy getting out of his truck with the duffel bag, we saw the sheriff pull up behind him. The man panicked and literally threw his duffel into his truck and tried to back into the sheriff to get out. When he realized he was blocked from behind, he went through the yard. We could not believe our eyes. The truck peeled out, tearing up some of the lawn. The sheriff came to the door to check on us and told us he had units down the road waiting for him. We all shared a good cry and rejoiced in our safety. However, it did create some paranoia issues in the following weeks because we didn't know how long he had been in the house when he let himself in. Did he install cameras anywhere? Did he tamper with the food in the house to harm someone? It was unsettling, but we worked through it. We never heard anything about him being caught, and we did occasionally receive eerie messages on Facebook, 2 of which we knew were from him, but we put that out of our minds. We haven't heard anything from or about him since about 3 months after the incident when we received the last message. It's been about 11 years since the incident, but we still talk about it when we can. I'd like to share with you a series of horrific events from my childhood that we never had a real resolution to. There were some suspects, but no one was ever brought to justice. Also, there have been a lot of terrible things that happened on my mom's property, and that's another story. Here's part of the beginning. This part of the story happened roughly around 1990 during my summer break from school, but continued for quite some time. I must have been about 2nd or 3rd grade age. I grew up with just my mom. My dad was never in the picture, so we lived alone until I was about 12 when she remarried. Our secluded, country neighborhood was safe for the most part, and all of our immediate neighbors were elderly, save for one couple who had a few young adult sons around my brother's age. For the most part, we didn't have much trouble in the area. At first, there were only minor clues to indicate something was going on, such as things being moved in the backyard. My mother has always been a paranoid conspiracy theorist, so she had an idea that something was happening. I didn't really know this until I heard her talking about it much later after the events. She tried to hide things so they wouldn't scare me. She even started sleeping in my room with me at night, probably because she was paranoid, but I assumed it was because we could stay up late and watch movies together and eat snacks. One morning after I got up, I noticed that our old wooden back door had huge chunks missing out of it around the part where the lock bolt goes into the door frame. It was as if someone was trying to chip away at the lock part. I showed Mom what I had discovered, not realizing why the door was damaged, and she went completely silent, pale-faced, and panicked. I could tell something was wrong, but I was too young to understand that someone had apparently tried to break in either at night or when we were out. That day, she mended the door to the best of her ability, and if I remember correctly, she even put a new different lock on it from the hardware store. She also filed a police report, but there was nothing they could do. I had a German Shepherd named Munchie. He was a big, spoiled baby who loved raiding the fridge with me, but to a stranger, he was probably very intimidating. He was my best friend and very watchful over me, and I still miss him to this day. For a week or two, after Mom and I would go to bed, Munchie would start pacing and whining, acting very anxious. Since we lived in such a rural place with no imminent danger, we thought Mom would frequently let him outside by himself, so one night, when he was acting exceptionally strange, she let him outside alone. We didn't have central air because our house was old, built in the 50s, we were poor, and Kentucky summers were really too hot anyway. At night, Mom would open up all the windows in the house, with the halfway burglar latch, of course. Since she was in my room with me, watching a movie, we had both my bedroom windows all the way up. My back window overlooked a bit of a hill, which gradually sloped into a low, wide bottom. The bottom was full of tall weeds and bushes. Suddenly, we heard movement in the brush of the bottom, Munchie. Then we heard him snarling like a werewolf. Mom got up and ran to the window, but couldn't see anything. What we heard next was horrifying. It sounded as if Munchie was attacking someone. He was making those awful noises as if he was eating someone alive. I began to cry, terrified that something would happen to my best friend, and my mom started screaming in horror for Munchie to come home. We heard what sounded like someone escaping my dog's wrath and taking off through the brush. Mom ran to the back door with me right behind her and called for Munchie at the top of her lungs until he came running back into the house. He was panting and grunting and bristled up. I hugged him so tight, I probably nearly squeezed the life out of him. As time progressed, things got worse. Being so young, I didn't know for a long time, but my mom was safeguarding the house. She even moved a tall dresser in front of my window that overlooked the hill and bottom. She tried her best, but whoever was harassing us was finding new ways to make our life hell or maybe try to kill us. One night, she said she heard peculiar noises coming from the backyard. I don't necessarily remember this, so I called her for details before writing this. The sounds were coming from under the dining room windows, which overlooked the backyard. She turned on the security light at the back of the house and saw a ladder propped up against it, as if someone was trying to climb through the windows. This incident seemed more like an empty threat than a real attempt, especially considering the back door would have been easier access. We don't know if the person thought the windows would be unlocked or what, but for whatever reason, they gave it a try. Again, she called our local police, and they did nothing. I should note that law enforcement was very limited in our area. You probably wouldn't believe me if I tried to tell you how ineffective law enforcement was and still is there. On another occasion, and this memory is burned into my brain because it scared me so badly, someone sneaked up to my bedroom window one night. I hate to even think what their intentions might have been. Mom had drifted off to sleep, but I was quietly watching the rest of Willy Wonka. I was looking in the direction of my ominous window, the one overlooking the backyard, so I ended up getting a good look at this big, white hand that reached up and hit my window screen multiple times in rapid succession. I screamed, Mom woke up, and the person took off, no doubt through the brushy area. My mom is a dog person. She adores dogs and has always had lots of dogs and puppies around. We had 7 little black pups and the mother dog around that time, and they lived outside on our huge property with plenty of space to play in a nice, big dog house. Around the same time these incidents were happening, we had to be out of town for a few days. Mom had some people watching the house, and I guess she didn't think anything terrible would happen. Then again, she wasn't aware of how far this would go. When we came home, Mom's puppies had been killed and lined up in a row in the side yard, close to my window overlooking the backyard. This was devastating. The police did little to help, which included advising her on how short to saw off her shotgun so that it was still legal, and suggesting we keep Munchie in the house. I forgot to ask, but I'm nearly positive Mom ended up sending the mother dog away to my sister's house on the other side of town. Months later, the incidents were increasing in frequency, and then someone decided to take it too far. Something hit the back of the house in the early hours of the morning. Mom looked out the windows and saw nothing, at least not until the next morning. She found a stick with a charred pine knot on it. Someone had apparently lit it on fire and thrown it at our house. I assumed they were hoping our house would burn. And don't even ask about the cops, because they did nothing, yet again. I wouldn't be surprised if they knew who the culprit was and didn't care. Then one day, Munchie went missing. He had gone out to the bathroom in the evening before bed, but he didn't come back immediately like always. He vanished. I don't even want to go into detail about this because it breaks my heart all over again, but we found him days later. He had been poisoned. To be completely honest, I could keep going with this story, although it takes a lot of unbelievable turns. Not all of them are horrifying, some were just ridiculous. Then, around a multi-year court case began where my mom had to fight a group of her neighbors in court to keep them from stealing her property. Those events led us to believe the people involved in that case may have had something to do with the torment we experienced all those years ago, but honestly, all we can do is speculate. So, tormentor, I wish we could meet, but you're a coward who intimidates women and children and hurts animals. When I was growing up, my older brother raced flat-track motorcycles, and as a result, my dad and he were gone most weekends during the racing season. Sometimes my mom, younger sister, and I would tag along, but my mom was never really into it, so she would keep my sister and me home most of the time and plan fun things for us girls to do during the weekend. This incident happened on one of the weekends when we stayed home back in 1987. I was 10 and my sister was 8. It started out like any other Saturday with my dad and brother gone. My mom took us out to eat at McDonald's, we went to the mall, and then we came home to play Monopoly and watch cable. Around 10 p.m., my sister and I started to get sleepy, so my mom brought out the sleeping bags for all three of us to sleep in the living room together. I had to ask my mom years later what time this was because, as a kid, I didn't pay attention to the clock so much. So, around 2 a.m., someone started banging on our front door. Our front door was pretty strange. It had 4 large panes of glass that weren't opaque, so they were covered with small curtains. We all woke up to this pounding, rushed to the door, and looked out one of the windows. There was a girl at the door, probably in her late teens or early 20s, and I remember her wearing a white and blue windbreaker. She was frantic, crying, and begging my mom to let her in because she said her boyfriend was chasing her and she was afraid he was going to kill her. My mom remained calm in a scary situation and said, "I'm sorry, love. I can't let you in because I've got 2 young children with me, and I can't risk your boyfriend harming them if he gets in. I can call the police for you if you just stay here." Of course, that didn't sit well with the girl as she started crying more and pointed to her foot that was broken and in a cast. "Please, ma'am, you have to let me in. He's coming for me." Again, my mom politely refused, turned, and ran to the kitchen to call 911. Our phone was mounted on the wall in the kitchen with a ridiculously long cord, so she was able to go back to the door while on the phone with dispatch and told the girl that police were on the way. This made the girl go even more frantic, and she said, "I don't need the police because I will be dead before they get here." My mom apologized again and said she was sorry but wasn't going to open the door. At this point, the girl just turned around and walked off into the darkness, and about 5 to 7 minutes later, the police showed up. My mom gave a statement, and as she was doing so, my dad and brother came home from the race. My dad didn't even turn off the truck. He just ran up, looking terrified, and asked what was going on. While my mom was telling my dad what happened, another officer walked up and said that he didn't see anyone but found a shoe in the street in front of our house. The police left, and we all sat in the living room for a bit to decompress. I remember thinking that maybe my mom wasn't being very nice to the girl and should have just let her in. Fast forward to 2001, about a week after I gave birth to my first son. Family and friends were at my house, doting on my baby. After most people left, it was just my parents, my sister, me, and my son sitting in my living room this time. I made a comment about how I didn't really love the neighborhood we moved to, but I was proud of actually having my own home with my husband. Then my sister said, "Hey Mom, remember that lady that came to our door demanding to come in?" My mom said, "Yes, very well." At this point, I could tell my mom and dad weren't comfortable talking about it because they gave each other nervous glances. So, my sister, being the troublemaker that she can be, said, "Why didn't you just let her in? I wonder if her boyfriend did end up killing her." My dad interjected and said that my mom did the right thing because it was late and we were home alone. Then he added this little into it, plus, they ended up finding her in a car with her boyfriend smoking dope a few blocks over. They had rope, duct tape, 2 shovels, and a ton of knives in the trunk. My sister and I said in unison, "What?" I asked why we were never told about that, and my dad said they decided not to tell us so that we wouldn't feel unsafe in our own home. Finding this out made me feel like a huge jerk because I had always thought that my mom was being somewhat rude, and I always wondered what happened to the girl. Now I know my mom most likely prevented a home invasion with her tough but right decision to deny this girl entry into our home. Learning about that sent chills down my spine. Even writing it out now gives me goosebumps. Hello, for context, I'm a 28-year-old blonde woman and I look around 18 to 22, I'm told. I recently went back to college for human resources, so I was on the GO train at 1 p.m. on Monday to get to a 3 p.m. class. The train originates outside the city and it's very quiet during the day when it's not rush hour. I got on the train and walked upstairs, but decided to go to the middle area. There's a middle area next to a bathroom because someone was humming and I thought it was annoying. The washroom door was closed the whole time. I didn't think anyone was in there. I was alone in the middle area with no one around me. I'm sitting with my jacket off, drinking tea out of a bunny mug with my backpack across from me. I felt completely comfortable because the GO train is typically a calm ride. A man pops out of the bathroom after 5 minutes of me sitting there. He is around 22 years old, has white fine line scars in the shape of a heart and a 3D cube on his face. He puts his hands on my backpack. I assume he's going to try to mug me. I think I'm going to punch him in the throat and run because this isn't my first attempt at mugging. I've never successfully been mugged. But my body froze because his first words were, "I'm gonna kill my father tonight, and I'm gonna make you help me." He doesn't want my debit card. He wants to hurt me. I currently work in mental health, and I am used to working with people with homicidal thoughts. I don't scare easily when someone says their voices are telling them to kill me because I feel like I have all the resources I need and the rapport with my clients. I don't know this man. Immediately I know this isn't just thoughts or a case of being lonely and talking to random strangers. He's not seeking help from me. I need to leave, but his leg is blocking me in. I hear my voice shaking as I say, "It sounds like you're going through a lot right now. I'm sorry to hear you're upset with your dad. Tell me about it." I grab my backpack. I know I look terrified because I just know this isn't good. He says, "No, you're not because women like you sleep with my father, you insensitive person." He gets closer and corners me into the seat, saying he's going to make me help him kill his dad with a knife tonight because he's tired of pretty women like me always ignoring him but being intimate with his dad, asking me why I do stuff like that. I feel terrified, and I realize that we are 2 feet away from a washroom, and I'm scared he's going to try to force me into it while my body is frozen. His face gets closer to mine. I scream at the top of my lungs, "Help me, help, help." Honestly, I didn't even recognize my own voice. I sounded terrified. 4 random passengers come running, 1 man, 2 young women, and 1 middle-aged woman. The man says, "Are you okay, miss?" The guy across from me puts his legs down and screams that he's calling for help because he's a self-centered person. We're all self-centered and unkind, and all he wants is someone attractive, not like him, as he motions to his scars. I bolt upstairs, and I couldn't even talk for a minute. My hands were shaking. I have been in some scary situations before, but I was comfortable during my commute, not on guard like I am at work. The man who came to help me sees he's mad and still yelling. Honestly, I don't remember what. He tells me to run towards the customer service train, and he'll make sure the man doesn't follow me. We press the yellow security strip before I get up and go, and the train starts beeping, but no security personnel come. The man who came to help me finds me later when the train stops and tells me that the man strolled off the train as if nothing happened. However, the 2 young women who came to me had their phones and took many pictures of him walking away and gave them to the police. I walk to the customer service train. The police come, but the man is gone. They talk to me for a few minutes and say they know who he is because of the scars on his face and because he did something similar yesterday. They think he has mental health issues, as if that changes what happened. Honestly, the police officer didn't seem interested in talking to me. They asked if I saw his knife. I say no, but it doesn't surprise me because he mentioned a knife, and the way he spoke was with the confidence of someone with a weapon. They obviously don't care about what I think he could have had. They explain that he slapped another woman on the train, and someone saw he had a knife out at some point earlier in the train ride. It's about a 55-minute ride along the entire line into the city, and someone called the cops even before we pressed the emergency strip. But the customer service train employee didn't even know that. He only knew my story because no one else pressed the security strip, and I ran to him. I just want to say that someone with mental illness can be homicidal, but it's not a symptom of who they are as a person. It's a sign of how unwell they are at that moment. Not all people with mental illness have homicidal thoughts or are violent at all. I know very kind and wonderful people who have homicidal thoughts when they go through life transitions. These people do not scare me. Maybe this man had mental health issues, but he scared me to my core, and I'm grateful that people came to my aid when I called out, and the young women took pictures because my gut tells me he would have done something if I hadn't started screaming. I sincerely hope if he had mental health issues, they took him to a hospital so he's not roaming free. The worst part is I saw a young woman, around 18 to 20, crying at the train station the next day, and I overheard her saying she cried and hid in the washroom the entire train ride to this station because a man scared her when she got on the train and had to call her parents to pick her up. I have no clue if it was the same guy, but I felt like it was possible, and it bothers me that he's frightening any woman, but especially young girls who might be too scared to scream. It's been a few months, and the police have never contacted me to let me know if they caught him. He never actually touched me, so I guess it wasn't serious enough for them. It made me permanently anxious during my commute, and I never sit alone or take my jacket off anymore. I'm never really comfortable on the train. This happened around 3 years ago. I was living with a roommate and going to school, and I was around 22. I'm female. It was a weekday evening, and my roommate had informed me that she was going out clubbing and staying over at another friend's house. She had invited me, but I didn't really feel like going. Instead, I made plans to sit on my couch, watch junk TV, and work on homework. Around 10 p.m., I went to the gas station to get some candy and energy drinks. I remember that day pretty well because I had gotten out of classes pretty early, had just gotten my hair done, and was feeling pretty confident and cute. I went into the gas station, and there were 3 guys, probably in their 20s, just lurking around. They looked like your average frat boys, and I remember one had shaggy blonde hair and was covered in tattoos. I noticed one of them nudge the other and nod in my direction as I picked out my snacks, but I didn't pay much attention. They paid before I did and left. After I got my stuff, I walked out to the parking lot and saw them sitting in a beat-up, old car, and all 3 of them seemed to be staring at me. I hopped in my car and headed back to my house, which was literally only a few minutes from the gas station, and they started their car and followed. I didn't think much of it, figuring they were probably just heading in the same direction as I was. However, I lived pretty deep in a subdivision with a lot of turns, and after a minute of pulling in and making several turns, I noticed they seemed to be following me. I got nervous since I knew I was home alone, so I kept driving past my house. I pulled out of the neighborhood and back onto the main road, and they were still following. I just drove for a while, and they sped up and really started getting close. Then they started flashing their lights and actually pulled up next to me and rolled their window down. The part of me that has faith in humanity thought, what the heck? Do I have a low tire or something? But when I looked over and saw them leering at me, I knew it wasn't anything like that, and I immediately began to panic a little. We were on a more deserted stretch of road now, and they were swerving almost like they were going to ram into my car, but I just sped up. All I could think was, should I drive to the police station? It's like 15 minutes away from here, and there are a ton of stoplights on the way. What if I have to stop and they block my car or something? Fortunately, by this point, I was getting somewhat close to my sister's house. She lives pretty close to me, about 15 minutes away, but in the opposite direction of the police station. My hands were shaking, and I was trying to navigate the road with these jerks speeding up, slowing down, and trying to nudge me off the road. I picked up my phone and dialed my sister. She answered on the 4th ring. Without preamble, I immediately asked her if Josh, her husband, was home. She sounded confused but said yes. Josh is in the military, and I knew he owned guns. He's a good guy, but we didn't really talk much, and I never felt particularly close to him or anything. Tell him to get his gun and come out to the driveway, please, I said, by this point near tears. I dropped the phone, and one of those guys threw something, I think a plastic Coke bottle, at my driver's side window when they sped up near me. I finally saw my sister's house and pulled into her driveway. The entire house was dark. No porch light. Nothing. I was so scared. I misheard her. They weren't even home, and there aren't any neighbors that would be close enough to run to. The guys pulled up behind me so I couldn't back out of the driveway, and they all jumped out. They all started walking up to my car, and one of them even reached for the handle and yanked on it. By this point, I was fumbling for my phone again. Dang, dang, dang. Do I have a weapon in here? Should I grab my phone and try to run? Should I back over these creeps or just stay locked in the car? In the split second that I looked up, 2 things happened. First, I made eye contact with the shaggy-haired blonde guy who was the one yanking on my door. He didn't look angry or drunk or anything. His eyes were dead and predatory. While I was frozen in terror, he looked cold, like he had done this kind of thing before. The other guys were trying my other doors, but I couldn't break eye contact with the blonde, who was inches from my face and only separated by a glass window. Second, I finally saw a shape move behind him in the darkness, and I heard a loud bang. All the guys stopped and looked, and my hero, my brother-in-law, stepped out of the shadows, creeping up from behind the house. He pointed his gun at them and told them to get out of there. They ran back to their car and sped off, screaming profanities at Josh and me. When they left, my sister ran outside and brought me in, The driveway scene sounds in writing like it took a long time, but in reality, it was only a few minutes. Because of that, and because of how dark it was, we didn't get the guy's plate number. We called the police, and they came out to get our statements. They said they would have someone patrol the area to keep an eye out for any cars that were the same make, model, and color, but that it would be hard to catch the guys without the license plate number. Unfortunately, nothing ever came of it. They never caught those jerks. I can only wonder what they wanted with me, what they were planning for me, or what would have happened if Josh hadn't been there. This happened a couple of months ago. I'm a 17-year-old female. I was house sitting for my parents as they had gone away for 2 weeks, and I thought I'd have my boyfriend stop over to keep me company. My house is an old, converted farmhouse out in the sticks with no neighbors or main roads around. Very secluded and peaceful. Anyway, one night he went out drinking with his friends. He is 18, so legal to drink in the UK. I was just sitting in the living room reading a book. Around midnight, I heard a single loud and aggressive knock on the front door. I momentarily panicked, given the lateness and the fact we have no neighbors and nobody ever passes by here. But then I thought maybe it was my boyfriend coming home drunk and had forgotten his key. I didn't have a text from him to say he was coming home, but like I said, he was drunk, maybe he forgot. I went to the front door and said, "Hello? Is that you, John?" My boyfriend's name. No answer. So I opened the door a touch and peered out. Nobody there. Weird. I shut the door and locked it again. Maybe I was hearing things, I thought. But 30 minutes later, I heard pounding on the back door. Really hard and angry pounding. It lasted about 3 seconds, then stopped. I was freaking out, obviously, and immediately texted my boyfriend asking him to come home as I was scared, and I think I should maybe ring the police. I was debating ringing the police. I know most wouldn't even need to debate this, but I didn't want all the hassle and stress of involving the police when I heard the front door open, close, and then silence. Now, the room I was in had a door separating it from the hallway, where the front door is. As you can imagine, I was shaking with fear. Whoever was doing this was now in my house, with just a door between us. The next thing I hear is nails clawing at the door of the room I was in, as if somebody were slowly scratching the door, but with force. It was genuinely the stuff of horror movies at this point, and I did the first thing that came to mind. I screamed and threw a vase at the door. Don't ask me why. I don't know what I was expecting that to do other than smash to the ground, but hey ho. Then silence. I heard the front door open again and slam shut, and footsteps on the gravel outside the front of my house. I did call the police. They found no signs of forced entry, searched the property inside and out, and found nobody. They found muddy footprints in the hallway, which the intruder must have gotten from the back garden, which is very muddy in winter. The front is all gravel, so no mud there. After they had gone, about 30 minutes later, my boyfriend comes home. The first thing I noticed was he didn't seem drunk at all. He'd been out since 7 p.m. and it was now like 2 a.m., and usually he stinks of alcohol after a night out. He seemed stone cold sober and no alcohol smell. I told him that someone had gotten into the house, and I didn't know how, as only he and I have keys, and there was no forced entry. He said, "Well, did you definitely lock the door after you opened it after hearing the knock earlier?" This confused me because I hadn't told him about the knock on the front door. I just told him the guy had gotten in and that I heard pounding on the back door. So how did he know I had opened the door? I also noticed his boots were muddy, which is strange because he got a taxi to see his friends earlier and only walked in the front garden to the taxi, which, as I said, has no mud. The back garden does, however, and somebody was pounding on the back door earlier. I questioned it and he just said he got the money outside the pub, but that's all street there, so I don't see how he could have. And to think of it, I don't recall hearing a taxi pull up when he arrived home. Usually, because it's so quiet, you can hear the taxi pull up outside. I don't know if I'm being majorly paranoid here or not, but I think I suspect my boyfriend of being the one behind that incident. We've been together a year, and he has never shown any weird behavior like this before or since, but I have an overwhelming instinct that he was behind what happened. Only he had a key to get in, and I definitely did lock it. I made sure after hearing a creepy knock that the door was definitely locked after seeing no one outside. I wouldn't have forgotten to lock it. It's been a couple of months since I haven't mentioned this to him or anyone other than you guys, but what should I do? Should I bring this up? Am I being paranoid? I'm really confused, but my gut instinct is telling me he was behind this, even though I'd be heartbroken if that were true. And if it was him, why would he do this? He says he loves me and acts like he loves me. He comforted me a lot that night and didn't leave me alone again until my parents returned, so I don't understand why he'd want to scare me like that. Edit. Whenever I mention that night to him, he always says to change the subject, and his reason is because he hates to think about what could have happened to me and feels guilty for leaving me alone, and that I should forget it and move on now. This happened about 4 years ago. Some backstory. I'm from Australia and lived there during this event. At the time, my girlfriend, now wife, lived in another country but was visiting me over Christmas break. I lived in a big city where driving about an hour in any direction would lead you to another city or beautiful nature spots, in my opinion. My friends and I decided to take my girlfriend to see some of this beautiful nature, settling on a national park about an hour and a half from where we lived. This place is definitely no secret, very well known, with various areas accessed by rural and windy roads. We went in 2 different cars, my friends in one, me and my girlfriend in another, to have some alone time. After a day of hiking, we headed home down one of the less traveled roads. I remember seeing a beat-up old 70s sedan with a wild-looking guy in the driver's seat pass us in the opposite direction. This wasn't unusual due to the smaller, economically struggling towns around. However, he and his car stood out, and my girlfriend noticed too. About 200 meters further down the winding road was a pull-off area, just a gravel semicircle for viewing the ocean. There was a camper van from a company that mostly rented out colorful vans to backpackers, with a woman standing in front of it. As soon as she saw us, she jumped onto the road and flagged us down. I've read enough to know pulling over to help on a quiet road might not be the safest, but back then, I hadn't, and my friends were right behind us in their car. Fortunately, she wasn't the person I didn't want to encounter. Clearly upset and scared, she was almost in tears when we pulled in. I told my girlfriend to wait in the car while I spoke to her. I can't remember where she was from exactly, but it was a Central European country from memory. She was touring around with her 4 or 5-year-old daughter. Her van had broken down, and she had called the company's assistance line and was waiting for help. By then, my friends had pulled in behind us, and a couple of them came over to see what was happening. Apparently, a scary man had driven past her multiple times already, initially stopping to offer her and her daughter a ride to the nearest town for help. She politely declined, waiting for the assistance vehicle. He left but kept driving past every 10 to 15 minutes from both directions, slowing down and staring at them before driving off. She begged us to stay with her while she waited, terrified of this guy. I agreed, and my friends, being awesome, decided my girlfriend and I were enough, so they left us. Thanks, guys. We stayed with the woman for a while until the car my girlfriend and I had seen earlier drove past slowly in the opposite direction. As soon as he rounded the bend, the lady informed us he was the scary man she'd been telling us about. Seeing him on the road heightened our concern. A few minutes later, he returned from the opposite direction and pulled into the parking area. Some context, I'm not an intimidating guy. I'm tallish but have almost zero muscle and fairly soft features. So, there's not at all intimidating me, a terrified foreign woman and her tiny daughter, my tough-as-nails girlfriend, who doesn't look tough but is, all parked off a quiet road in a rural location, with this not-so-friendly looking dude joining us. Great. He got out, very redneck looking and definitely unfriendly. No judgment on the redneck part. I come from a poorer country town north of our city, and those are my people. He strolled over, and at that point, I walked towards him to position myself between the women and him. I have no idea where this bravery came from, as I wouldn't describe myself as brave normally. He glanced at the women and then me, asking if he could help. I told him no, that we were waiting for the assistance vehicle and had it under control. He suggested staying to wait with the woman and her daughter so we wouldn't have to, but I declined politely. He stood there for a while, staring at us all, not saying much, giving off seriously creepy vibes. After what felt like ages, another car drove past, slowed down to look, then continued. This seemed to startle him. He muttered good luck, got back in his car, and drove off. We waited with the scared woman and her daughter for almost 90 minutes, talking and hopefully making her opinion of Australians a little brighter after encountering Mega Creep, who drove past once more about 15 minutes after leaving us. Finally, the assistance vehicle arrived, manned by a bigger guy who seemed capable. I asked to see his ID and check everything to be safe, but he was in a company-marked car with all his tools and seemed legit. We gave the lady my number and asked her to text when she was safe. She was incredibly grateful to us for staying so long, and it felt good to know that even if the guy was just a weird-looking, awkward country guy not meaning harm, we had made her feel more comfortable in a strange country. I don't think he was, and I definitely believe he was up to no good, but you never know. She did message me to say she was safe, so everything ended well. But creepy mountain dude, let's not meet again. Edit. Thank you all for the kind words. As I mentioned, I never thought of this encounter as potentially a matter of life or death for them. It's very humbling. I spoke to my wife, and she reminded me of a couple of details I'd forgotten. They were from Switzerland. While waiting for the mechanic, she spent most of the time playing with the little girl and teaching her handstands to distract her from the situation. I can't believe I forgot this detail. After the guy left, she whispered in my ear, "When he was here, I was trying to make myself look bigger to scare him off. Then I remembered that's for bears, not people." This happened years ago, but still affects me to this day. The summer after I graduated high school, I was still living at home. I was up late one night packing for a camping trip with my friends. It was unbelievably hot, so I had the window open as I sat and folded clothes. It was around 2 in the morning when suddenly a hand came through the gap in the screen of my window. I screamed, and the hand quickly withdrew. I was stunned, but there was a part of me that wondered if it was my younger brother pranking me. I went into his room, and he was there playing video games. We called the police, who came and searched the area. They found nothing, warned me and my parents to lock the windows and doors, and then left. We were all still shaken up, and my mom had a feeling that he would come back. Turns out, her mother's intuition was right. She went outside and waited on our back porch. After about 20 minutes, she saw a man dressed in black slink into our backyard along the tree line. Unfortunately, there wasn't a fence on that side. He hid behind a tree for a few seconds, then ran to another tree and hid there, slowly working his way towards my window. My mother yelled at him, and he took off running. The police came back out, but once again, found no trace of him. I never opened that window again, not even the curtains. My parents installed motion detecting lights, and that seemed to be the end of it. About 6 months later, my friend and I got an apartment downtown together. We were really excited because it was our first place on our own. The apartment wasn't the best quality, but it was fun living in the city. The downside was street parking only. After a few weeks, my car was broken into. Nothing was taken, but a single rose was left on the passenger seat. It was creepy, but I vowed to be vigilant and safe. I always tried to park close to the entrance under the lights, but often had to park farther away on darker streets. Things quickly escalated. My car was broken into at least once a week. Most of the time, a flower was left, which I always threw on the ground, but once, men's underwear was left. Even creepier, once a bag of Tootsie Rolls appeared, my favorite candy. This made me wonder if the person knew me personally, and I started becoming suspicious of everyone. There was a laundry in the basement of the apartment, and one day I went down to get a load that had finished drying. As I started to fold, I realized all of my undergarments, bras, and panties were gone. Another week, a male friend from school came over, and his tires got slashed during his visit. By the time the first letter arrived, I had already started making plans to move elsewhere. The letter described a love for me that had been going on for years, noting things that proved he had been watching me closely. I arranged for another friend to take over my lease, and I moved in with another friend on the other side of the city. It was a secured building with an underground parking garage accessible only to tenants. I felt much more secure, and the extra money spent was well worth the peace of mind. Things were quiet for a few months, and then my roommate got a boyfriend. Most of us were wary of Ashley's new boyfriend from the beginning. They met on MySpace after he reached out to her, and another reason was that the new boyfriend, Matt, was extremely good looking. While Ashley was a wonderful person, she just wasn't the type you would typically expect someone like him to date. Ashley was thrilled. She had never had a boyfriend and really felt like he was her Prince Charming. I thought he was strange and creepy from the beginning. Matt was on the quiet side and always seemed to be sporting an uncomfortable, leering smile. It was difficult to carry on any sort of conversation with him because he would always make it weird with some random facts completely unrelated to our topic. I had deleted my MySpace when the initial stalking began, but I created a dummy account to learn more about Matt. It didn't look like he really knew any of his friends in real life. There were only pictures of himself, and the rest of the information was vague. My friends and I gently tried to discourage her from seeing Matt. He technically hadn't done anything wrong, but he was just so strange. She would immediately get defensive and shut down the conversation. Matt started spending more time at the apartment, and I found myself finding any excuse I could to avoid coming home. One day I came home from work and found Matt on my couch, alone, drinking a beer. Ashley had been called into work and told him he could just hang out. I was furious because I didn't want to spend any time with him, so I grabbed a beer and a snack and headed off to my room and shut the door. About 30 minutes later, he knocked on my door and suggested we watch some TV and get to know each other better because we both loved Ashley. Reluctantly, I agreed. He put on a movie, and I tried to just focus on it because I didn't want to talk. At one point, I glanced over at Matt, and he was staring at me with a smile on his face. I snapped, "What?" at him, and he continued smiling, saying, "I just can't believe it." "Believe what?" I asked. He said nothing and went back to watching the movie, still smiling. I had no idea what he was talking about, but the interaction made every hair on my body stand up. I excused myself and locked the door to my room. Another month or so went on, and I had managed to avoid being home for much beyond sleep and showering. Matt practically lived there and had even brought a bunch of his things into Ashley's room. I really didn't want to move again, but was beginning to look for other options. On their 6-month anniversary, I saw a huge bouquet of flowers on the table and an already open card propped up next to it. I rolled my eyes and was about to leave when I decided to see what the weirdo wrote to her. When I opened the card, my heart started racing. Without even reading the words he wrote, I was shaking. The handwriting was exactly the same as the one from my stalker. I had kept them as evidence and dug them out of my desk for comparison. The handwriting was unique and identical. Matt was the stalker. I called the police first. As they were on the way, I called Ashley and asked her to come over. She was at work but said she would be there when she could. I was terrified to tell her because I knew she would be shattered. The police took a statement from me and actually went to Ashley's work to get more information from her, and they ended up breaking the news. Apparently, Ashley called Matt and left a furious message even though the cops told her not to say anything, and he completely disappeared after that. There was no Matt or anyone matching his description at the place he said he worked. Ashley had never been to his apartment because he said he had been staying with friends while trying to save money for a trip to Europe. His family lived out of state, and she had never met any of his friends because he said they had a falling out over him choosing to spend so much time with her. It was all lies, and in the end, she was dating a stranger. We don't even know if Matt was his real name. The cherry on top of this whole thing was when we went through Matt's things. He had left everything when he disappeared, and Ashley and I decided to go through it all. There was a duffel bag full of gym clothes, but in one of the compartments were about 10 pictures of me. All were taken from far away, except one of me sleeping. The sheets were current, so I know it had to have been at the current apartment before I started locking my bedroom door. A few pictures dated back to before the incident at my parents' house, which made us think it was him as well. 2 pairs of my missing underwear were there, and I shuddered to think what he did with the rest. There was a Starbucks lid with my red lipstick marks, a necklace I hadn't even noticed was missing, and a few other random, sick souvenirs. The police never tracked him down. I decided to accept an opportunity overseas that I had been considering and got the hell out of there. Unfortunately, Ashley and I quickly drifted apart. She had a really hard time accepting that her first love was a complete psycho. I think I had some underlying anger, maybe misplaced, for believing all of his lies and letting him into our lives. I don't know what his end game was. Would he have tried to hurt me, or was he simply content being in my world? I'll never know. Being stalked changes you. Even while I lived across the world, I looked over my shoulder everywhere I went. I still have no social media accounts attached to my real name. I am married with children now, and I know that he moved on to torment some other poor woman. But every time I visit my hometown, I am tense and keep a low profile. Part of me will always worry that Matt will resurface again. So a few months ago, I was out hiking with my friend in the mountains of Western MD. We were about 6 miles into an 8-mile loop that we've done frequently when we decided to take some pictures and eat a snack at a summit. This area of the trail had a park, benches, tables, and a parking lot. As we were sitting and talking, I noticed a man walking alone in the parking lot. He was walking aimlessly and staring at his feet, dressed in jeans and a button-down shirt, which struck me as odd for hiking attire. We decided to set off on the last 2-mile leg of the loop, which descends downhill to the park headquarters. This part of the trail is cut into the mountain bank with limited visibility and requiring single-file walking. I was walking in front and talking to my friend when I turned to look at her and saw the same man right behind her, following at a very close distance. I immediately felt a gut-wrenching feeling. I noticed he didn't have any hiking gear or boots, and something about his eyes really spooked me. After a bit more walking, he continued to stay uncomfortably close. I told my friend I needed to tie my shoe as an excuse to step off the trail and let him pass, in case he was following closely to go faster. She caught on immediately, and we pulled over. He looked startled, and she greeted him politely, but he just stared. It was then that I noticed he was carrying a stick. As I pretended to tie my shoe, she positioned herself between us, and we let him pass. We waited for him to get ahead, but he immediately slowed down. After waiting a bit longer, he reached a point on the trail where he could see us and turned around, looking back at us. Feeling uneasy, we decided something was off and didn't want to pass him again. So we turned around and walked back up the trail towards the park with the tables and parking lot. After a few minutes, I looked back and saw him following us up the trail. We started walking faster, practically running. We reached the parking lot area where we had been before and strategized, deciding to wait and see if he would come back up the trail to the lot. With more people around, we felt safer waiting it out. After about 20 minutes, nothing happened. We debated whether he had continued on the trail and was gone or was waiting in the deserted part. We saw a couple coming up from the trail where we had been, likely taking the loop in the opposite direction. We approached them and asked if they had seen anyone on the trail between this lot and the next. They mentioned seeing a young man sitting on a rock about halfway down, describing the man who had been following us. We recounted our interaction with him to the couple, discussing whether he posed a threat. Finally, the husband interjected, saying, "We need to call a ranger." He wasn't just sitting there. He had a knife and was carving that stick. Needless to say, we called a ranger. The kind couple walked the last leg with us to ensure we got to our car safely and even gave us their numbers in case we needed anything. The rangers searched the trail, but there was no sign of him. I wish I knew where he went and what happened, but I'm relieved to know that my instincts were correct. This happened a few years ago when I had just moved to a new city at age 20, female, working and going to school full-time. I had a hard time meeting guys my age, so I turned to online dating in hopes of meeting the one. I chose Plenty of Fish, thinking it somehow wasn't like the other dating sites. This is where I met Anthony. He messaged me first, and there were a few red flags, but I was desperate to talk to someone off POF who wasn't just trying to hook up or score nudes. I noticed all of his pictures were of random pro skateboarders and Nick Cave. Naive, I continued to chat with him because he seemed harmless. I couldn't quite point out what gave me a weird feeling, but it all started off innocent enough and I thought he was just a little weird/quirky. A few random and odd messages on POF, some song lyrics, long word vomit type soliloquies, compliments on my red hair. Again, naive, I gave him a link to my personal blog on Tumblr in hopes of having some common interests. Anthony made a Tumblr account that night and went through every single one of my posts, liking each one, going all the way back through years of content. I must have had 500 likes by the next morning. Some time passed. I was no longer interested in pursuing Anthony, mostly due to the fact that all of our conversations were one-sided and just random and bizarre. Every once in a while, he would send me a random message on Tumblr about clouds, his clothes, some more unrelated lyrics, his love of foxes. He actually asked me to go on a date with him, but I told him I had a boyfriend. By this time I had been dating my boyfriend for 6 months. Anthony still continued to like my posts on Tumblr, was reblogging a lot of art, animals, and various interests. He posted one selfie of his face. He looked my age, messy long brown hair, beard. I was grateful we had drifted apart and simply deleted and ignored any messages he sent me from his account. One day I received a message on Tumblr from a girl named Tandy. She said she had recently moved to the city and was looking to make some friends. She had been following me for a while and thought we had a lot in common. I looked at her Tumblr, and she had quite a bit of content dating back several months. All of her posts related to my own interests, and I thought I had met my new best friend. We began chatting for hours, bonding over various things and exchanging experiences. She loved all the same music and seemed like such a cool person. Being new to the city, I still hadn't made many friends and was eager to perhaps start an offline friendship with Tandy. I invited her to my boyfriend's show. I figured it was public and safe. I would be surrounded by people, and by now I had added her on Facebook, saw what she looked like, and felt comfortable with her. She didn't have many friends or updates on her page, but I attributed that to the fact that she said she was new to the city, a homebody introvert type, and was putting in long hours at a local radio station where she worked. Innocent, naive me believed everything. I was so excited to have made a friend. We had even exchanged numbers and texted daily. I know that the person I was talking to that whole time was indeed Tandy. After chatting for a month, the day finally came. It was my boyfriend's show, and I was going to meet her. The doors had just opened, so there weren't many people at the venue yet, but I recognized her right away sitting at a table. I noticed she was not sitting alone. She was sitting with a guy in a toque with his face shrouded with hair and a beard. My heart literally stopped because I realized she was sitting with Anthony. My boyfriend was setting up his gear. None of my friends had arrived yet. No one knew at this point about Anthony. Only my boyfriend was aware that I was meeting Tandy at the show. Tandy smiled at me and said hello. She hugged me. Anthony was silent. He stared at me. I awkwardly waved to Anthony. I said, "Hey Anthony, we finally meet." Anthony smiled and nodded his head but did not say a word. Tandy quickly interrupted, saying, "Anthony told me you guys met on Tumblr too." Small world. Anthony is actually my boyfriend. Somehow I just could not believe the coincidence, but regardless spent the night with them, chatting with Tandy and being stared at by Anthony. He literally did not say a single word to me the entire night. My boyfriend had no reason to think anything was going on, and for some reason I was super embarrassed about this situation, so I did not tell my boyfriend about Anthony that night. Later, I texted Tandy to inquire about her relationship with Anthony. I didn't get a reply. I called her 3 times and the phone was out of service. I went online. Her Tumblr was deleted. I went on Facebook. Her account was there, but no longer being updated for the week that I watched it. She didn't respond to any of my messages. I went onto the website for the radio station where she apparently worked, and she was not listed anywhere as personnel or a volunteer. Later, I made a friend who worked at this radio station, and she confirmed there was never anyone named Tandy who ever stepped foot into the station or did any of the stuff Tandy claimed to be doing. Tandy effectively disappeared off the face of the earth. I went onto Anthony's Tumblr page and he was still posting art, music, foxes. I decided to check what he was liking on Tumblr, and all of his likes were of red-headed women in various states of bondage, abuse, Kate Winslet in Titanic, Scully from the X-Files, fan fiction about kidnappings and enslavement, red-haired women dressed as foxes in cages. I still thought I had control over the situation. In fact, nothing happened for a while after that. Until a month went by and I was at the art gallery with some friends. I was going through the exhibits when my heart dropped. Anthony was there too. He followed us through the exhibit for a while, then disappeared. I couldn't figure out how he knew I was at the art gallery on that day. I saw him at a few other events that I could not understand his connection to. No one knew who he was. He just lingered in the background and disappeared. I saw him at a bunch of other shows, a smaller party at my friend's gallery, and a pop-up shop downtown for my friend's business. My boyfriend had another show a few months later. The band was loading in gear, and the bar was empty. Doors had just opened, maybe 5 minutes, and I was waiting for sound check. I look at the bar and my heart drops again. In full construction uniform, Anthony is at the bar holding his hard hat. He is still wearing his work vest and work boots. By now I am freaking out and actually ran into the bathroom to think about what I needed to do. The woman at the bar saw me run into the bathroom and came to check on me. I asked her about the man in the construction uniform at the bar, and she told me he was really strange, had arrived an hour before doors opened, and stood outside waiting to come in. He didn't order a drink, he just appeared to be waiting. I asked this woman to get my boyfriend, who was just finishing sound check at this point. I told my boyfriend everything I knew about Anthony. Of course, my boyfriend went to Anthony like a bat out of hell and interrogated him at the bar. Anthony had no expression as my boyfriend told him to get lost and that he never wanted to see him again. Anthony took his hard hat and backpack and left. When the show started, I finally began to relax. My friends were there, and I felt a little more protected. I looked beside me, and you guessed it. Anthony had changed into regular casual clothes and was standing right beside me. He just stared. I ended up hiding in the Greenland the entire show and left early with my boyfriend. We could not find Anthony after that. My boyfriend asked how Anthony was finding out my whereabouts, especially considering the art gallery trip was only talked about on a Facebook group event. I told him I never added Anthony on Facebook. My profile security settings were on the highest possible. My boyfriend asked if I still had Tandy as a friend on Facebook, and I said yes. I then realized that Anthony was stalking me through Tandy's Facebook account, and I needed to block and delete her. It took a lot to accept that Tandy was not real, had pretended to be my friend, and was perhaps even paid by Anthony to gain my trust. That was hard to swallow. I blocked and deleted Tandy, and I never saw Anthony at an event ever again. Then my boyfriend started getting strange friend requests on Facebook. One was from a fan of his band who lived in Ontario. My boyfriend initially was stoked and had no issue talking to this fan about his music and possibly making it out to Ontario for a show. But as the conversation went on, he got a bad feeling. More and more, this fan asked my boyfriend about his rose, which was what the fan referred to me as. The fan asked my boyfriend if he would bring his rose to the next show. My boyfriend got wise to this and blocked the fan immediately. He didn't tell me about this fan until a few months later. I happened to be on my boyfriend's computer and noticed him in a Facebook conversation with a girl named Lynn. She was beautiful. Blonde, thin, listed as a model, and living in a city 3 hours away. I couldn't help myself as the messages started to pile up while I was checking my email. I read my boyfriend's conversation with Lynn, and my heart sank. Initially, I thought he was having an affair with her. Lynn was using such sweet language, sending pictures, asking him to meet up, asking if your Rose would be mad if she found out. I was shaking. I called my boyfriend down and asked him straight up who the heck is Lynn. My boyfriend said it was Anthony. I didn't believe him until my boyfriend told me about the fan, showed me all the messages, pointed out the location where all these messages were coming from, the same city we lived in. Anthony didn't realize at the end of every message it said, sent from not Ontario, not the nearby city, yet the profiles listed a different city entirely. Lynn had hundreds of friends who ended up being bots from Thailand and India. Lynn used the same style and language as the fan and, I noticed, Anthony himself. I ended up checking Anthony's Facebook and found out all the information and pictures he was using of Lynn were actually from one of Anthony's mutual friends on Facebook. I found her actual legitimate profile and everything. My boyfriend and I blocked and deleted all the accounts. I gave up my blog that I spent over 5 years cultivating and gaining 5K followers. Anthony went as far as to find a few listings that my boyfriend had made on Kijiji for various things. Anthony actually contacted my boyfriend and set up a meeting to buy some tools. All was set to go. My boyfriend was going to meet him until the potential buyer called my boyfriend to ask, "Can I meet you at home?" My boyfriend declined. The potential buyer then asked, "Will your Rose be with you?" My boyfriend hung up and deleted all of his Kijiji ads. Anthony must have found them by searching my boyfriend's email. By now, I am terrified and have gone to the police, but unless Anthony physically harms or threatens me, nothing can be done. We lived like this for about another year. So by now, I have been stalked by Anthony for 2 years. Eventually, all the weird stuff just stopped, and I never heard from Anthony ever again. His Tumblr is still active. He still posts foxes and likes and follows a very particular kink scene with redheads. I haven't seen or heard from him for several years now. My boyfriend is the only one who has ever heard Anthony's actual voice. It was the fall of 2007, and I was 15, living in New York. I was a competitive athlete in high school, the type who got up before school for workouts and trained for long hours after. With recruiting season a year away, I was under tremendous pressure to perform in my sport, as well as in the classroom. I was struggling to keep up in calculus at the time, so my mom suggested I get a tutor. She made an appointment with a teacher friend of hers who really knew his stuff. I'd been going to him regularly, probably 3 times a week for a month, before I met Alex. Alex had the tutoring session after mine, and we crossed paths every week. It had never been more than a glance and a smile, as I was incredibly shy and wary of boys. He was tall and blonde with piercing blue eyes, so naturally, I thought he was cute. One day, my tutor had to change his schedule and decided to book us together, as we were learning the same topics in calc. I was shocked and delighted when Alex started chatting with me afterwards and asked for my phone number. I had never had a boy pay attention to me in that way, and I was flattered that someone that cute wanted my number. Eventually, Alex and I began dating. Alex went to Catholic school in another town, but because he lived in the same town as I did, he took the bus every morning from my school to his. This gave us most mornings together, and he was able to meet my friends. I was a little taken aback when they didn't take to him like I did. They mentioned him seeming weird, and I got super defensive, but let it go. I realized that I'd been spending less time with them than I normally did and assumed they were jealous that I had a boyfriend. As time went on, things got more serious. We started experimenting sexually, and eventually, I lost my virginity to him in the back of his Ford Escape. That's when things began to change. While Alex and I always talked regularly, he started getting over the top about staying in contact with me. He would make me stay on the phone with him all hours of the night, until eventually my mom started taking my phone before I went to sleep. This relationship also started taking a toll on my athletic career. I was too tired to spend my extra time training and started skipping my practices to see him, driving 30 minutes each way to his school. Eventually, my friends sat me down and told me how unhealthy this relationship had become. I had isolated myself from them, and my entire free time was spent with him. At this point, I wanted so badly to end the relationship. I had fallen out of love with Alex, and college applications were approaching. I had been scouted by no less than 10 colleges, and my plan was to attend Brown, my dream school. Alex's obsession with our relationship had taken a huge toll on his grades, and Brown wasn't going to be an option for him. I remember when I told him that was where I was planning on going, and he freaked out, saying he would never get in there and begging me not to go. At the time, I was also recruited by the University of Illinois. Alex applied there, in hopes that I would ditch Brown and go to Illinois with him. That was the final straw for me. I ended things for good with Alex, assuming that would be it. Because Alex would take the bus from my school to his every morning, I still had to see him. I remember walking into school past him and his classmates who took the bus with him, and some of his guy friends yelled idiot and jerk at me. Apparently, he had spread a rumor that I had cheated on him with a bunch of guys and then ended it with him. I ignored it until I started getting Facebook messages from random people at his school. I spent months getting nasty messages from guys at his school, accusing me of various things and telling me I was going to get hurt by his friends. Eventually, I had to delete my Facebook because it wouldn't stop. I think deleting my Facebook was what set off the stalker tendencies for Alex. He wasn't able to see my face online, so he started calling nonstop and sending desperate AIM messages telling me he loved me. While this was going on, I was the favorite to win the high school championship in my sport. I'd gone undefeated all season. Alex ended up showing up while I was competing for the championship, and I saw him there. It shook me so badly I ended up losing the title. I was furious and heartbroken. I ended up picking up his call that came that night and screamed at him, telling him to never contact me again. That's when the threats began. I got a call a few nights later from Alex. After he texted me, he had something important to tell me. Stupidly, I answered. He began to tell me how he was going to hurt me. He was going to show up at my house when my parents were at work with rope and a knife and make me suffer. I started to cry, and he eventually went on to say he was going to get me before I went into school because he knew exactly where I parked every morning and my parents were never going to find me. At this point, I had decided to record what was being said and had it taped on my phone. I hung up once I felt he'd said enough. The next morning, I went into school extra early, much earlier than I figured he'd be there. I showed my advisor the recording, who then called my mom. I remember feeling a deep-rooted shame as my mom listened to the recording, like I had done something to bring this on myself. My advisor was so alarmed by the recording he advised me to go to the police. This day still feels surreal to me. My mom and I sat in the police station all day, explaining the story of my relationship with Alex and how it got to this point. The police then drove to his high school and arrested him while he was in class. The topper on the day, though, was when I went out to bring food back to the police station for my mom and I pulled into the station at the same time as the car holding Alex did. I saw him in cuffs, and he indeed looked like he wanted to hurt me. Post-arrest, I got a restraining order against Alex, and he was sent to a mental institution for a short while. He ended up violating the RO on more than one occasion. I contacted the police, but they didn't think it was cause to do anything. I think it's important to note that Alex's family was wealthy and had a name in the area, so it wouldn't have surprised me if that's why they brushed it under the rug. I ended up attending Brown and had to inform them of the RO and let them know that Alex should not be allowed on campus. It's been over 10 years since this happened, and I still continue to receive friend requests and phone calls from him on occasion. I recently moved across the country from where this occurred. I finally feel safe now that I am far from where he lives, but anytime I get a blocked call or text from a number I don't know, a thought goes through my head that it's him. It's safe to say that this experience has completely changed who I let into my life and who I choose to date. I'm currently a uni student, and on Tuesday nights I come home pretty late. Not late enough that my parents would call the police, but just missing the regular bus times. Anyway, as luck would have it, I managed to catch the very last bus one Tuesday night after getting to the station, and typically it's nothing to be worried about. If you keep to yourself and stick to safe-looking people, example, other uni students, mothers, bus drivers, you'll be fine. Growing up in a dangerous country and migrating to a much safer one hasn't rid me of those instincts. That night, I got all bad vibes and buzzy. Something was off about that evening, and I didn't know what. We get to the main stop, the shopping center, and I find out that the bus has terminated its route. It's done for the night. Thanks, inconsiderate bus driver. Well, great. It's dark, it's late, I can't drive, my parents can't pick me up, they're at yoga, and I'm too broke to afford a taxi. So I decide to walk home. The exercise will be good for me. From the shopping center, it will take me a good 20 to 30 minutes to reach my house if I power walked. I could probably run home, but no thanks. When you leave the shops, if you follow the road, there's a local Catholic school, a public library, a public school, and a few bus stops along the way. Near the library is a traffic intersection, the most brightly lit area of this entire road. But it's also a very small square. It's a joke, honestly. As I'm walking, It takes me less than a second to realize how incredibly dark it was on that street. It was a bit creepy walking by the local Catholic school with their massive crucifix in the middle of a huge mass of land. In front of me is a girl who looks about my age, Asian, and she's walking fairly quickly. Understandable. From the corner of my eye, across the road, I see a man kind of half jogging, half walking, and I'm not sure what he's up to, but it was just weird. I kept an eye on him and the girl. At the intersection, my friend is there, and he greets me enthusiastically with a hug and a kiss on the cheek. He momentarily distracts me from the weird running dude and the girl. Between my friend and I greeting each other, I completely miss when the guy crossed the street and is in my path. My friend turns out to be a not-so-great friend and just leaves even after I've told him about the weird dude. I'm not far from the creep and the girl now, but he's talking to her. If a guy has any common sense, he will not speak to a girl woman while she's alone at night because we've all heard the horror stories. By this stage, I've quickened my pace into a sprint, holding onto my backpack so that my laptop inside won't make so much noise, and I'm assessing my very limited options on how to save this poor woman. I'm a very small, very unintimidating Asian girl, and the guy looked taller the closer I got. I felt very tiny and incredibly stupid for doing this because I was still kind of far, but I have crazy good eyesight and the streetlights were hitting his face so I could make it out accurately enough in case I needed to identify him. He was a white male, early 30s to 40s, brown hair, wearing glasses, a striped long-sleeve top, and brown khakis. His eyes were really big though, kind of like that face you make when someone surprises you with something particularly scandalous. And I come up with what was probably the most stupidly brilliant plan I've ever concocted. I kind of stand there, hoodie on, feet apart, hands on my hips, and my best, loudest impersonation of an older Filipino woman getting mad at her child with the strongest accent I could. Honestly, if I were a bit taller, I might not have gotten away with this. Hoy, what are you doing? You were supposed to be home already. And talking to a boy, and he's white. Excuse me, look at me while I'm talking to you. I did not raise you like this. I don't remember exactly word for word what I said, but I'm basically copying whatever my mom says when she's angry with me. The entire time I'm yelling, I can see the guy trying to inch away, and the girl looks so bewildered, like a deer caught in headlights. At this stage, honestly, I'm expecting her to run away. I turn to the guy. And where do you think you're going, huh? I will crush your. He ran for it. Like I swear, it was like watching a cartoon. The girl was still standing there, and I took off my hood and waved to her. I was still far away and asked if she was all right, in my regular, not very Filipino accent. She was just staring at me. I apologized if I scared her, but I had to get him away because my younger sister would tell me about a creepy guy that corners young girls in the park not far from where we live. Anyway, we hugged and exchanged names and numbers, and now we're basically friends forever. It turns out that she doesn't live very far and didn't even realize what was happening until she couldn't get away from the creep. I ended up walking her home, and from there, her older brother dropped me off. We called the police while we walked to her place. When we retold the story to our families, I very correctly assumed they were Filipino as well, so communication was easy. They banned us completely from taking the bus past 7. I was reluctant to tell my friends this because I knew they'd laugh, but it was such a serious thing. What if I wasn't there? As comical as that sounded, she was really shaken up but very relieved and grateful. She kept hugging me and stuff, which is weird. I don't usually hug strangers. Police later stopped a nondescript station wagon about 20 minutes down the main road. In it was a man matching my description. They searched his car and found a few photos of girls in the glove compartment and even more on his phone. They were all Asian, specifically Filipino. Months later, after I found out about this, my mom tells me that they actually found photos of my sister and me. It made me shudder. If that creep ever came near my little sister, I would really mess him up. A life-changing moment that will sit with me forever. So, all this happened a couple of months ago, and I only now feel comfortable sharing it. For background, I'm a 24-year-old woman living in Australia and work at an establishment that caters to an adult audience. One night, as my shift is coming to a close, one of the patrons asks to buy me a drink, which I accept because of employer policy. I talk him up to a couple of expensive drinks for the two of us, have a quick conversation, and make my excuses about my shift being over, but suggest he should come back to see me soon. I feel his gaze undressing me in his mind as he licks the splash of his drink from his upper lip. He stands up with this creepy grin and asks to walk me to my car. Now, I'm no idiot. I know never to put myself in that position and politely decline, telling him I might see him next time. I walk out, passing our biggest bouncer, and the guy doesn't follow me. Great, nothing extraordinary, just standard par for the course in my profession. But sadly, this isn't where our story ends. Oh no, for this guy, it's only just the beginning. I'm off for a week after that night, but when I come back into work, I'm told a patron has been coming in every night for the last week asking for me, saying he wants to buy me another drink. Naively, I think, oh great, a bigger paycheck this week, and get set for my shift. The night rolls on, and who should roll in but our man of the hour, asking for me, right? So I saunter over, and he buys me a drink. The whole time I'm sitting there with him, he just has this creepy grin on his face. Not like a sexual undressing creep grin, that's just normal. No, this was the kind of grin where he knows something you don't and is very pleased with himself about that fact. So, we're talking, and I'm getting him to order drinks for himself and trying to upsell where I can. About half an hour goes by, and I make my excuses to leave so I can try to spread the tips around. But this guy isn't having it. He won't let me leave, and the more I insist, the angrier he gets. He's practically hissy at me by the time I give a look to one of the bouncers, who promptly comes over and defuses the situation, giving me an opportunity to walk away. Phew, crisis averted. Wrong. The bouncer doesn't throw him out, he just gives me a buffer, so this guy starts following me around the place, even attempting to walk into an employee-only area, where another bouncer finally notices and kicks him out. I finish my shift and walk over to my car. There he is, sitting on the bonnet of my car. How he knew it was my car, I will never know. He wants me to give him a ride and tells me how sexy I look. He's spewing greasy slime ball lines at this point, and I'm not interested. I try to hint nicely and decline to give him a ride, but again he turns mean, grabs me by my arm insisting I give him a ride. I tell him to buzz off and jam my key into his shoulder as hard as I can. He lets go, and I push him with all my might, so he falls down. I jump in my car, lock the door, and shove the key into the ignition. He's back up and banging on the window angrily, trying to get in. And I mean hard, so hard I think his hands or my window might break. I gun the accelerator and I'm out of there. When I get a few minutes down the road and am sure I'm not being followed, I pull over to the side and call back to work. I tell them what's happened and alert them that the other girls need to be careful leaving tonight. As I hang up the phone, I break into tears. Now, this isn't my first rodeo. I've been grabbed before, and the sad truth is I probably will be again. But you never get used to it, you know? I eventually compose myself, pull back onto the road, and head home. I cry myself to sleep. The next morning, word has gotten around, and the owner calls me to make sure I'm okay. I assure him I am, but he insists I take some time off in case this creep comes back. He wants to put some distance between us, which makes sense. A week goes by, Then too, he's coming in every night asking about me and being told I quit and don't work there anymore, a lie to get him to stop coming in. But he just keeps coming in and asking, clearly not buying it. Then suddenly, 2.5 weeks in, he stops. Great. I really need the money at this point, so I'm happy to be able to go back to work the following week. Time goes on, and everything seems to go back to normal, same old chancers, but the good kind that led to higher paychecks. Abusive guy doesn't come back in, and I'm happy. I start being forgetful though. I think I leave a door closed when I leave the house, but it's open when I get back. Lights on or off, food left out. Things ending up in different places than I remember putting them, sometimes moments before. I'm losing it, but it's probably just the stress of everything that's gone down. One of my close friends who works with me reassures me that it's normal after being grabbed like that and it will pass. This keeps up for a month until one day I head out to work, get 15 minutes down the road, and realize I forgot some clothes I'll need that night at work. I head back home, only to find the lights in my front room on and the TV visible as I'm from the outside. I really am losing it. Good thing I came back, I guess. I head inside, grab my stuff, make sure to turn the TV off and the light out, and head to the door. Suddenly, I freeze. There, standing blocking the door, is the creep that grabbed me. I'm stunned, jaw dropped to the floor. Then, after what seems like a lifetime of standing in silence staring at each other, him smiling that grin, I scream, "What the hell?" I'm yelling for him to get out and asking him what he's doing here, how he knows where I live, all in one jumbled mouthful of confusion. He just stands there with that smile on his face while I'm loudly freaking out but stupidly not moving. I start gasping for air in a mixture of panic attack and bewilderment, then he decides to speak in my wake. The words ooze out of him and leave me chilled. "Welcome home, honey. You're back early." A switch goes off in my head. I throw everything I have on me at him and sprint to the back door. I'm out of there. I run faster than I ever have in my life, screaming bloody murder as I go. No one helps, stupid apathetic society. I hide in some bushes around the corner, tears running down my face, gasping for air. I check my pocket, and my keys are still there. No phone though. I threw that at the stalker creep along with everything else. I sneak back to my house, jump in my car, and get out of there. I head to work, tell them what's happened, and call the cops. The police head to my house and send others to my work. The stalker guy is gone when they turn up. They search the house, and it turns out he's been living in my crawl space. I'm paranoid. That's what all those doors, lights, and misplaced things were about. I pack up whatever I can fit in my car while the cops are still there that they'll let me take, and I drive. I haven't been back since. I moved states, knew everything. So, creepy stalker guy, let's not ever meet again. Edit, quick update. I took my car in to get checked by a mechanic as some commenters suggested. Nothing was found. I have been in touch with the police, and they are reporting that while they have his photo from security footage, they haven't been able to track him down yet. That means he's still out there somewhere, and I still have no idea how he tracked me. Back in 2007, I found myself working as a bartender at a now-closed pub in my hometown, not a job I particularly liked, but it paid the bills. At this time, they had hired a new kitchen manager that we all simply knew as Kearney. Kearney was a pleasant enough man, mostly keeping to himself, but he always stayed late to help the barman with our closing duties, so we all liked him for that. New in town, Kearney had yet to find a permanent residence, and I had recently lost my tenants, so someone suggested he ask me. He was considerably older than the tenants I usually took in, but having had a streak of bad luck with tenants my own age, I thought an older man with a steady job might be a shift in the right direction, so I agreed. Kearney wasted no time and followed me home that very same night, only he wasn't alone. Enter Lawrence, Kearney's boyfriend. Honestly, I hadn't even realized he was gay up to that point, but it was water off my back regardless. Looking back now, what really should have bothered me, though, was Lawrence's appearance. He looked like he had been sleeping on the street, rather appropriately, as I would later find out. So Kearney moved in. Lawrence was there a lot too, and it was easy to know when due to his mobile ringtone sounding like the quacking of a duckling. Kearney had some habits that were rather noteworthy to this story. 1. He basically never closed his bedroom door. No matter what he was doing in there, it was always open. And 2. Although he was a heavy smoker, he never once smoked inside the house. About 2 weeks into Kearney living there, I came down with an awful case of pink eye, which is highly contagious. I was given leave of absence from my bartending job and decided to wait it out at my sister's for a few days. Apparently, I didn't mind giving it to her. Sorry, sis. So the day my sister was scheduled to pick me up, no, I couldn't drive yet. I took a casual stroll into the bar that my good friend Ben, from high school and then a coworker, and I had been building in my house. Something caught my eye. All our liquor bottles were completely empty. Now, those who had been frequenting my house at that time would know we weren't just talking about 1 or 2 bottles of brandy here. Bottles of whiskey, gin, vodka, schnapps, liqueurs. It was basically a fully stocked bar that could host a pretty big party without needing additions. So I called Kearney in, asking him what he knew about this. He explained that Lawrence and he had been on a slight drinking binge. Those were the actual words he used, which left me furious about the thousands worth of stock they had drunk, but also slightly impressed that he was actually still alive. Regardless, I said I would deal with this upon my return. I stayed with my sister for a few days, and on Friday, I got a call from my local police department asking me if I knew a Conrad Schultz. Ironically enough, I didn't. They then added that I would probably know him as Kearney and that I should come down to the station, as they had just arrested his boyfriend for trying to sell my camera equipment. My sister rushed me back home, where all my camera equipment was on display at the police station. It was during this visit that I learned Lawrence was actually a Navy SEAL who had been dishonorably discharged before turning to a life of crime, now with a rap sheet as long as the Bible. The kicker was that both he and Kearney were actually homeless men who had met at the Salvation Army. With Lawrence in jail, my sister dropped me off at home around the same time Kearney arrived. Based on Kearney's account of what had happened, he had turned Lawrence in himself, as he couldn't allow Lawrence to harm me. Although I appreciated his sacrifice, I still told Kearney he would have to leave, as he was the root cause of all this. However, not wanting to leave the homeless man, homeless, I gave him until the end of the month to make other arrangements. Monday arrived, and after a staff meeting, I walked home to find Lawrence, now free, sitting on the sidewalk across from my house, watching it. I confronted Lawrence about why he was there, and he tried to apologize before begging for money, rather out of character. I dismissed him without giving him a cent. Now, going back to the previous night, I mentioned the staff meeting for a reason. We had received a sizable list of liquor bottles missing from the storeroom, leaving us all suspecting each other. I, however, didn't have to wait long to figure out the real culprit, as a few days later, I opened the garbage bin in my kitchen to find the missing bottles, all empty, staring back at me. I decided to keep this information to myself for the time being, though I did photograph it, just in case I needed evidence later. I also called Ben over to inform him of the developments. As this was quickly becoming a detective game, we decided to search Kearney's room for further evidence. There wasn't anything of vast significance in there, except for 2 single photographs of Lawrence before he became the homeless version of Lex Luthor or Charles Xavier. Actually, there were several of Lawrence's things still there, but considering Lawrence had spent a lot of time there before the incident, I accepted this as normal. I should also mention that I had told Kearney about Lawrence's release and warned him that if I even suspected they were still in contact, I would throw him out myself. Only a few days passed before this came into play. On one particular night, while I was bartending again, Kearney kept stopping by the bar to help himself to half-filled draft glasses of wine and Coke, which he would drink outside the restaurant. We confronted him about this, but as he rightly pointed out, he was still a manager, and we had no right to tell him what he could or couldn't do. On his fourth trip, however, I had grown suspicious and decided to follow him outside. There, I encountered Lawrence sitting with Kearney, sharing their half-Coke, half-wine concoctions. This irritated me, so the next day I returned to the restaurant with my photographic evidence. I handed it over to the general manager, who was also a kind of friend of mine. Although I hadn't physically witnessed it, I overheard the confrontation through the office door when he fired Kearney. Kearney left visibly upset, seemingly unaware that I had been the one who reported him. Later that evening, after we had closed early, as I walked home past the high school, I saw Kearney approaching from the opposite direction. He passed by me, uttering only 2 words, "I'm scared," before disappearing into the darkness, marking the last time I would ever see Comrade Schultz. As the final week before Kearney's eviction approached, Ben came to stay with me. We both wanted to monitor the situation and ensure nothing else happened. During this week, Kearney's behavior abruptly changed. He smoked constantly in his room, keeping his door closed 24/7. Neither Ben nor I caught so much as a glimpse of him during that last week, which we initially didn't think much about. On the day of Kearney's eviction, Ben had briefly gone home. Finally, I heard Kearney's bedroom door open, followed by someone leaving through the front door. I followed him outside, but he had already vanished completely, leaving only his house keys behind, clearly not planning to return. Examining the keys, I noticed something odd. Alongside his own keys were several that didn't belong to me. Why would he leave the wrong keys? I wondered as I entered his room. His room was shocking, not because of its state. The 2 had broken his bed in a wild escapade, though I already knew about that since he never closed his door, but because he had left nearly all his belongings behind, except for one thing, the 2 photos of Lawrence. Upon closer inspection, I realized all signs of Lawrence had vanished, leaving only Kearney's belongings behind. However, one reminder of Lawrence remained, his duckling ringtone, which turned out to be an actual duckling now casually wandering the vacant bedroom. We named him Neville. When Ben returned, I updated him on the bizarre turn of events. We both found Kearney's departure odd, but in hindsight, the entire situation had been strange. It was only when I posed the question that turned this into a conspiracy theory. Did you actually see Kearney at all last week? To our astonishment, we realized neither of us had, piecing together the puzzle, the changed habits, Neville the duckling, the wrong keys, and Lawrence's missing items. Unease settled as we both pondered who had really been living in our house that last week. In the following days, Ben and I embarked on a mission, scouring the town, exploring drain pipes, searching for any trace of Kearney's whereabouts, but found nothing. Comrade Schultz had seemingly vanished without a trace. Lawrence, on the other hand, hadn't disappeared. He was still around, now mingling with new homeless acquaintances whom we encountered several times begging on the streets. Each time, I asked him, "Where's Kearney, Lawrence?" But he feigned ignorance. The last time I saw Lawrence, he was across from my workplace, attempting to break into a car. I promptly called the police, who arrived swiftly and arrested him on the spot. As he was being led away, I shouted after him one final time, "Where's Kearney, Lawrence?" He ignored me, allowing the police to take him away. The next day, I filed a police report, reporting Kearney as missing and suggesting that Lawrence might know something. However, nothing came of it. So, Lawrence, I don't know if you were involved with Kearney's disappearance or not, but let's not cross paths again. When I was about 6 years old, my mom started taking my sister and me to Dr. Daniel's pediatric dental office. The dental center was located inside a giant yellow mansion that also doubled as Dr. Daniel's house. It was honestly gorgeous. When I first started going to the dentist, I was extremely shy and actually suffered from selective mutism and had a lot of autistic-like tendencies. Needless to say, I relied heavily on my mother's comfort and for someone to give me a voice, because it was extremely anxiety-inducing for me to talk to strangers, especially men, for some reason. When my sister and I got called into the office from the waiting room, my mom followed us until she was told by Dr. Daniels that parents were not allowed to be with their children, as it taught kids independence, to which my mom complied. Once in there, he immediately separated my sister and me. In reaction to that, I cried because I felt so scared. Dr. Daniels did not like crying, so he grabbed me and covered my mouth and nose with his hands, shook me, and sternly warned me that if I continued to cry and scare the other kids, he would make my situation a lot worse. Obviously, this scared me even more, so I started to cry again. Dr. Daniels had enough and took me into the house part of the dentist's office, where he yelled at me again, grabbed me by the neck, and pushed me. His hygienist Judy came over and told me that if I continued to cry, she would spank me so hard I wouldn't know what had hit me. Afterward, he gave me a juice concoction and left me alone in his house for about 5 minutes until he took me back into the dental office and performed work on my teeth. I guess I instinctively knew that if I wanted to survive, I just had to act like I was not terrified and hold back the tears. All I wanted was my mommy. After the first appointment, my sister and I told my mom that we were scared of the dentist and that he was unkind, but she dismissed it as me being an anxious child, so we continued to see him. Each visit was just as terrifying. Every time we pulled into the mansion, my heart sank inside my chest. It was no longer pretty to look at. Every time we went to the dentist, Dr. Daniels, or the tooth man, as he called himself, always had us undergo heavy dental procedures. We had seals placed on several baby teeth and many teeth extracted, some with his fingers, with no regard for pain levels at all. Often, during a tooth removal or seal placement, when our mouths had to be held open with a retractor, like this, he would leave us there with the retractor for about 45 minutes before he came to work on our teeth. Sometimes, he would even eat his lunch while we sat there with our mouths open, which was one of the worst pains I have ever felt in my life. I remember one time, in 3rd grade, I had been leaning in the chair with the retractor on for an hour. I was in so much pain I couldn't take it. I sat up in the chair and tried to scream and cry as loudly as I could. Dr. Daniels rushed over, furious, removed my retractors, and then took me back into his house part where he yelled at me for being a big baby and scaring the other kids. I was so disappointed in myself because I hadn't cried in so long. He then returned me to the dental chair and pinned me down in my seat with a restraint. He replaced my retractors and said that I would have to wait longer because I had caused such a scene. All I could do was shed silent tears and drool everywhere, unable to even wipe it away because my arms were restrained. Afterwards, my mouth would become so swollen and filled with sores that it hurt to talk for days. Bruises and swelling would appear as soon as I left his chair. He would often tell my mother I was a difficult patient if I so much as winced at his procedures. Once, he removed 6 of my teeth at once, and I could barely eat. While he extracted teeth, he would often sing songs, making it feel like something out of Sweeney Todd. When I was in 7th grade, I began getting new braces and started seeing an orthodontist. Not long after that, we stopped seeing Dr. Dan and started seeing a new dentist who was actually kind. I had never realized that getting your teeth cleaned didn't have to feel like going through a saw trap. I think my mom took us out of Dr. Dan's practice when the orthodontist reviewed our dental records and noticed numerous unnecessary procedures. Recently, I was having a conversation with a friend about childhood fears, and instantly my mind went to the tooth man curious. I googled him to see what had happened, and to my relief, the practice was shut down. Also under his name was a Yelp page that was still up. The page was filled with numerous 1-star reviews from former patients who were abused as kids in his office, using the page as an outlet to express their trauma. I started to cry because their experiences were so similar and even identical to what I went through as a child. It was heartbreaking, but also validating to know that I was not alone. Many of the procedures we underwent were simply a scam for him to collect money from our parents' insurance. Now that I think about it, he probably insisted on us not crying out for help because he didn't want parents to hear and witness what was going on. I shudder at the thought. I sincerely hope he hasn't opened another practice somewhere else. It's hard not to blame parents in this situation, but the truth is, this man was an abuser. For every bruise and sore, he had dental explanations that made parents feel foolish for questioning him. He was an authority figure. I don't blame my mom for not believing us. She knew he was strict, but probably thought we were mistaking firmness for cruelty. To be honest, even writing this, the abuse sounds so extreme it almost sounds fictional. Eventually, she did come around. She's not alone, as hundreds of parents were deceived and manipulated by him. And to any parent reading this, if you were ever told not to accompany your child to an appointment, something is really wrong. On a rainy night, in the era before cell phones, I was 18, walking a very long way home from work. I foolishly accepted a ride from a strange man. I was a small-town girl, living in my lonely world, and had just finished a double shift. He was elderly, acted genuinely concerned for me, and I noticed a Bible in the back seat. Probably safe, right? The car was old and broken down, and he struggled to open the door for me due to a bum leg. He mentioned that the passenger door didn't open from the inside. I felt uneasy immediately, but years of nice girl training told me not to refuse after he'd gone to so much trouble. We chatted for a while. He politely complimented my uniform, my hair, and said I resembled his late wife, implying her spirit had led him to help me get home. It sounded sweet the way he said it. Our conversation turned to school, my hobbies, and eventually whether I was on my period, which was rude. He acted like it was a joke's punchline, so I nervously asked why he wanted to know. He calmly replied, because if you're fertile, we should start trying for a family right away. Oh, shoot. He explained that God had kept him lonely for years, but seeing how much I resembled his late wife, it was clear I was meant to be with him. He wanted to start anew, have many children like his late wife couldn't. He kissed my hand and said, I can't wait to show you our new bed. I lied about forgetting something at work. He said I could retrieve it tomorrow. I said I needed to use the bathroom. He insisted I could hold it until we got home and refused to let me out. He kept discussing how things were different back then, emphasizing men as heads of households, women following fathers and husbands, all according to God's will. He reminisced about his wedding day, how his wife's father had given her to him. That's when I blurted out, "You'll ask my father's permission to marry me before taking me home, right? That's what God would want, right? We can't live in sin. The marriage bed isn't holy." I recalled many church sermons on this. He took offense, claiming he knew the Bible better than I did, and of course, he knew to ask my father. I insisted we stop at my house before going home, reminding him it wasn't far. Trying to keep things light, I joked that's what a godly man would do, and he enthusiastically agreed. When we reached the street I claimed was mine, I pointed to a house with a fake number far from mine and asked him to drop me there. He wanted to come inside, but I said I needed to inform my parents about God sending me a husband first. I asked him to return the next day. He agreed, but urged me to hurry. I asked him to drive around the block so I could pack my things. He nodded, finally unlocking the car door. I dashed to the house, waited until he drove off, then sprinted to my actual home, where I lived alone. That night, I double-bolted my door and pushed the couch against it. I never saw him again. I regret not calling the police, but moved in with my boyfriend a few days later. From then on, I insisted on waiting at work until he could pick me up every night. last year, my fiancé and my mom passed away, one right after the other. After they died, I obviously fell into a deep depression. Though I thought I was pulling off the whole I'm fine thing, my friends could clearly see through it. A close friend almost insisted that I move in with her and get out of the apartment I had shared with my fiancé for 10 years. She wanted me to start fresh, and while I didn't think I was ready to move on, the idea of not living alone was appealing. Plus, her apartment is in a much nicer neighborhood than the one I was currently living in, so I agreed. Living with her has been fantastic. Our schedules are opposite, me on days, her on nights, so we both get alone time, but we also have at least one day a week off together so we can hang out. Moving has also allowed me to walk to work since it's so close. I thought that would be a godsend until my 10-minute walk caused a 2-month-long nightmare. I decided to sit in the park that's between my apartment and my job one evening after work. As I'm sitting there, a man approached me. I saw his face first. He was almost handsome, if not a little rough-looking. Even though I live in an urban area with a high homeless population, it didn't occur to me that this man was anything but a mildly handsome 40-something guy, so I smiled and looked back down at my phone, expecting him to walk on by me. Nope. He asked me what time it was. When I looked up to tell him, I noticed all the stuff he was carrying. It was so random, a kid's chalkboard with nonsense all over it, a paper bag full of old magazines and paperwork, and a steel shelf that at one point would have held CDs. Then I noticed he wasn't wearing shoes, and his hands were filthy. Needless to say, it finally dawned on me that this was not going to be a normal encounter. He started talking non-stop. Some of it was nonsense, but some coherent, all of it crazy. Other parts one could follow. He told me he had just been released from prison and he was looking for a tattoo shop because he wanted to forget the DOC, the Department of Corrections, and 34, the number of DOC violations he had while in prison, tattooed on him, and he wanted the DOC to pay for it. He then noticed a button I had on my bag that had the logo for a local bar on it. He told me he had gone there one night and went home with a guy. Then he looked me up and down and said, "But young ladies are my problem." I gathered my stuff and left immediately. Now, I love this apartment, but it has its drawbacks, which became glaringly obvious after this encounter. The apartment is on the first floor. I love it because you can walk out the sliding glass doors, one in the living room and one in my bedroom, right onto an awesome gated patio that has tables and grills for barbecuing, so it's awesome in the summer. I now hate it because it's right on the street, and the fencing is clearly very easy to scale. One very early morning, around 5 a.m., I heard a man scream, "What the heck are you doing?" so loud and so close it woke me up from a deep sleep, and I legitimately thought it was coming from in my bedroom. As it turned out, it was coming from outside. A neighbor had been leaving for work and discovered a man, the man from the park, sleeping against my sliding glass door. The guy got scared off. My neighbor checked on me, and once I calmed down, I chalked it up to a messed up coincidence. 2 weeks later, I was sleeping, and at some point, this man came onto the patio and was now tapping on my sliding glass door. I honestly just lay there, frozen in fear, until he escalated to full-blown kicking the glass. I turned the light on to grab my phone, and he took off. I called the police, and they came over to take the report and to look at footage from the cameras in the building. The footage confirmed it was the man from the park, and more disturbingly, the footage from the hallway cameras showed that on more than one occasion, he had slipped into the building behind a resident and sat in the lobby for several hours, at one point going down the hallway and trying my doorknob and my neighbor's doorknob to see if they were locked. He even went so far as to hide in the little mailbox room when he saw my roommate coming in from work. The police think he either followed me from the park or had just happened to notice me at one point while I was on the patio. It's been a few weeks, and I haven't seen him, and no one has reported seeing him in or around the building. My roommate bought me pepper spray, and my somewhat eccentric, albeit well-meaning, neighbor who has made it very clear he's retired military and a bit of a firearms enthusiast, checks on me nightly, so I'm not as freaked out as I could be. But still, crazy guy from the park, let's not meet again. Trapped inside, he roams free. I've been lurking on here for a while, and I've been meaning to share this incident for a while. I'm ill and off work today, so I decided today's the day. I have had more than my fair share of creepy encounters, but this one was particularly dramatic, one where I really did feel my life was in danger. Names have been changed to protect the dignity of my two cousins. I was on holiday, visiting family in South Asia. Having been born and brought up in England, a lot of things over there are quite foreign to me, relevant for later on. My parents and I, were staying at my uncle's apartment. My aunt and uncle were at work, and my parents had gone away for a day trip to visit relatives in a neighboring town, leaving me at home with my two cousins, Hamish and Adam. Adam was 8 years old at the time, Hamish was 3. I was about 12 or 13. Adam and Hamish always argued about everything. If one wanted a particular cereal at breakfast, an argument would break out over breakfast choices. Adam is silly for wanting Cocoa Pops. My shred dies are so much better. I'm not even going to sit here and eat while he eats that horrible stuff. While playing with a toy, let's make the doll swim in the lake. No, it's not a lake, silly, it's the sea, and so on. In short, I was very used to them disagreeing and squabbling, and couldn't remember any time they were in harmony, especially over playtime. This may seem like a digression, but it is relevant background information for later on. On this particular day, Hamish was in the living room, building a Lego boat. He had been working on this boat for a few days now. Adam had gone outside to play with his friends on the street. He'd left the door slightly ajar, so he could come and go. It was a hot and humid day, as usual, so I went to take a shower. I was sitting in my room, drying my hair, when Hamish came running to me, in tears. "Tashina, my boat, it's broken." "What?" "My Lego boat, someone stepped on it and broke it." "Oh." He grasped my hand and led me to the living room, where the boat was snapped. He was really upset. It had been his pride and joy, so I commiserated and reassured him that all hope was not lost. It shouldn't take too long to fix. I thought he must have broken it himself by accident, perhaps stepping on it and not realizing he had been working on the floor with the boat sitting on the living room rug. With Hamish finally placated and back to work on his boat, I went back to my room. A few minutes passed without incident. I could hear Hamish moving around, and I heard Adam come back inside and go to the living room. I got a book and curled up on the bed. It was a lazy, drowsy sort of day. And then, all that was shattered. Adam and Hamish came charging into my room, almost tripping over each other. "Tashina, Tashina." Hamish ran to me. Adam paused to slam the bedroom door closed behind him. "There's a man in the living room. He's wearing a mask, and he had a knife. He must have been the one who broke my boat." Wait. I looked at the pair of ashen faces, completely solemn. "Are you playing some sort of game?" "No." "He's wearing a horrible, scary mask. He has a knife." I got up, slowly, still not sure whether they were messing with me, play acting, and this was some sort of pretend game. "Where?" "In the living room," said Adam, pointing. "He's wearing a mask?" "Yes, like a Halloween mask, with a scary big smile on it," said Adam. "Smile showing teeth," said Hamish, nodding along furiously. "And he had a knife," said Adam. "A big knife," said Hamish. "Yeah," said Adam. They looked entirely serious and terrified, looking at me with their upturned, earnest, and pleading faces. I think, more than anything, it was the fact they agreed upon the description of this man and what he was carrying that really cemented for me that they were telling the truth. If this had been some sort of pretend game, they would have disagreed by now, trying to outdo each other in what he was wearing or the weapon he was carrying. Instinctively, I went to the door. I wasn't sure why or to achieve what purpose. I still wasn't scared. I knew they were telling the truth, but could there be an innocent explanation? They were overexcitable kids. My hand went to the door handle. "No," said Adam in a hiss, and they both came running towards me, their hands clawing at me. "Don't go out there." "Wait, okay, so let me get this straight. He was in the living room?" They nodded. "What was he doing? How did you manage to escape? Did he threaten you?" "I was sitting on the sofa to watch TV," said Adam. Hamish was on the floor with his boat. The man came in, and we saw the knife in his hands. "What happened then? Was he pointing at you?" "No, it was just in his hands. As soon as we saw him, we just ran and came to you." The living room has 2 doors, one that leads to a corridor that basically snakes around the front of the building, and the other one leads to a corridor to the inside of the apartment. The boys had taken this latter doorway, with the man presumably standing by the first one. The story did indeed make sense. It had come so suddenly, and it was taking me a while to actually process the seriousness of what they were telling me. There was an intruder inside the apartment with a knife. And I was the oldest, and so I was in charge. They had come to me for protection. Oh God, what to do? Okay. Let's not panic. What we need to do is, we need to call the police. Mobiles were still not common in this era. The only phone in the apartment was the landline, and luckily, it was right outside my room. It was on the table, in the corridor, facing the door to my room. Unluckily, however, it was not a cordless phone. However, if the cord was long enough, I might be able to grab the whole thing, pull it inside, and close the door. I rehearsed this in my mind. I need to get to the phone so we can call the police. "No, the man will get you," said Hamish, clinging to my arm. "He might be in the corridor," said Adam. We were all suddenly whispering, I realized. "Well, we can check," I said, my hand going for the handle. "No," hissed Adam. He grabbed my hand. "It's dangerous. Look, I'll just peek, okay? If he's there, I can quickly close the door." Adam eventually, though reluctantly, agreed. I turned the handle slowly. My stomach felt tight as I did so. The tension of the boys standing next to me did not help matters. I eased the door away from its frame, pulling it as slowly and noiselessly as possible. When it was slightly ajar, I pressed my face into the gap and looked around. The corridor was dark and empty. "Okay," I said, turning to face the boys. "There's no one there. I'm going to sneak outside, grab the phone, and come back, okay? As soon as I get back in with the phone, you close the door behind me. It's only a couple of steps to the phone. It'll just take a few seconds. Don't worry. Okay?" Adam was a wreck, wringing his hands and pleading with me not to go. Hamish stood stoic, nodding. I pulled the door open further and stepped outside. Hamish and Adam crowded into the space I had just vacated, peering out of the doorway to watch me. As I stepped outside into the empty, quiet corridor, I began to feel silly. Could this just be the boys' active imagination? Had they seen something on TV and become convinced it was real? Maybe I was just being foolish. Maybe there was no one there. I was feeling much calmer and incredulous about the situation. Still, it was possible. Better to be safe than sorry. I would take the phone inside and call my uncle to come home. I stepped up to the table and looked at the phone, quickly assessing it. I tugged on the cord that plugged it into the wall. Yes, it should be long enough to take inside. I picked up the whole thing and looked up. He was standing there. He was wearing a clown-like, grinning mask, and he had a knife in his hand. I don't think I need to tell you it was the most stomach-dropping, terrifying moment. The shock and fright felt like someone had just smacked my face. I couldn't scream. I dropped the phone and just leapt back to the door, charging back inside my room, slamming into Adam and Hamish as I did so. All three of us banged the door shut. Adam and Hamish stood, leaning against the door, and I dragged my bed in an adrenaline-fueled frenzy over to the door to barricade it. There was no lock on the door. Would the bed be strong enough, heavy enough? I began piling everything I could think of onto the bed to make it heavier. Hamish and Adam, wordlessly, joined in. The books, the bookshelf, all my bags, my suitcase, my clothes, the clock, everything. And then we all sat down on the bed, clambering onto it, leaning against the upper part of the door to make sure it couldn't open. Now that all was still, we just looked at each other. Adam began to cry. Not Hamish, the younger one, but Adam. Just bawling in a thin, whiny voice. "Oh my God, we're going to die," he wailed. No, we are not going to die," I said, but my heart was still pounding painfully against my chest and in my ears. I was going to be sick. I was shaking. Hamish was just sitting quietly next to me, his little hands folded across his chest. "We're going to die," Adam said again. Okay, calm down. What can we do?" I thought about it frantically. He can't stay there forever. We'll just wait until he goes away. I don't think I'll ever forget that image. Little Hamish, 3 years old, sitting next to me, looking solemn. His legs out in front of him, clad in those little jeans, with his hands clasped in his lap. His back leaning against the door. Adam on the other side of me, his knees pulled to his chest, tears streaming down his face, making whimpering noises. All of us, in a row, barricading the door. We could hear footsteps in the corridor, occasionally. The time pressed on, but our tension didn't wane. With every passing second, we expected to hear a thud on the door, the man trying to get in. Thankfully, it didn't happen. We eventually heard my aunt come in, talking in the corridor, wondering where we were, calling us. It was amazing, but there was a tinge of dread, in case the man was still in the apartment, in case he might attack her. We, all three of us, clambered off the bed and pulled it away from the door hastily, running outside. We told her what happened, and we searched the place, emboldened by the presence of an adult. There was no sign of the man. The frustrating thing was, though, my aunt and uncle, when he got back from work, didn't believe us. At all. She thought we were flat out lying for entertainment, which I found particularly undermining, given that, at 12 to 13 years old and mature for my age, I would never make up something as serious as that. First, she laughed and rolled her eyes, waving us away. When we persisted and repeated, insisting it really did happen and we were telling the truth, she eventually grew tired and told us to stop. I still find it astonishing how lightly some people take the complaints of children. We were shaken up for the rest of the day and felt very indignant at having been just shooed away after something so terrifying had happened. When my parents got back, we told them, and it was some solace that they did indeed take us seriously. They knew that it was completely out of character for me to just dream up or lie about something like that. My aunt and uncle, however, still didn't agree. Later in the evening, we were getting ready to go out to dinner. We heard my aunt cry out in surprise, and my uncle rushed to see what had happened. It turns out, all her jewelry was gone. That was when they finally did indeed believe that we had been telling the truth, and there had indeed been an intruder. Pretty high. So a few years ago, we went on a church trip to one of our favorite New Year's Eve concerts to celebrate the new year. It's not just concerts, there are all kinds of other events and activities besides the music. Anyway, we decided to go super last minute, and most of the hotels in the area were booked. We ended up staying in a rinky-dink little roadside motel, about 30 minutes away from all the events, pretty much in the middle of nowhere. The entire place was sketchy and made me uncomfortable, but I felt like we could deal with it. So, we were separated, boys in one room, girls in another, and chaperones nearby. We get into the room, and the first thing we notice is a back door. What kind of hotel room has a back door? The chaperones next door insisted that it was sealed shut, but soon after, one of the guys from our group comes over, jealous of our back door, and throws it open, proving that it wasn't sealed as we were told. We locked it and went about our business. Later that night, around 11:30 or midnight, we returned to our hotel, and our chaperones warned us to lock the doors because there were men sitting outside drinking, clearly drunk as they started making inappropriate remarks as we walked to our room. I didn't think much of it and slammed and locked the door, though the younger girls in our room thought it was okay to always answer without looking first, saying, "Why would they knock on our door if they didn't know us?" Not okay, and I had to explain to them that you should always check first before opening the door. Late that night, I was awakened by an odd sound, almost like tapping. I sat up and glanced around the room before realizing someone was knocking on our door. I quietly got out of bed, moving as silently as possible, and checked the peephole, thinking it might be the chaperones doing a late-night check. As soon as I looked out, a hand slowly covered the peephole, hiding two of the men who had been drinking outside earlier, and my heart started racing. I crept back into bed, trying to stay quiet and calm as the knocking continued. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow and realized someone was standing outside the back door, barely visible through the blurry, tinted window. One of the girls woke up too, looking at me with confusion. I used my phone to silently explain the situation, and we both waited, terrified, watching the shadows through the windows, hoping they would leave soon. Eventually, we managed to fall back asleep. When I left the room the next morning, I found a note on the ground. In shaky, messy handwriting, it read, "Seeing your pretty eye was enough." I can still remember the note perfectly, even though I shredded it and flushed it down the toilet to avoid anyone finding out. I was young and naive. Looking back now, I know I should have immediately gone to a chaperone and told them what happened. It could have been a very dangerous situation, and I'm extremely grateful that I woke up instead of one of the younger girls who might have opened the door without checking. I'm also thankful that I triple-checked the doors to make sure they were locked. At the time, it didn't seem like a big deal to me, but it could have had serious consequences. The only lasting effect is a permanent unease and fear of roadside motels. My coworker, let's call her Jane, is 33 years old, a virgin, and a devout Christian from a very strict, religious family. I'm not criticizing their beliefs, I was raised Christian myself. But these folks, they take it to a whole new level. Think of them like the Flanders from The Simpsons. I mention Jane's virginity because she's never had a boyfriend before. Lately, she's been on a few dating sites, but she's really picky about the guys she considers. She can be a bit uptight, which hasn't exactly made her popular. Recently, she meets a guy on OkCupid, let's call him Miguel. Miguel claims to live in a bigger city an hour away from our rural Kansas town. He says he's 35, also a virgin, and shows a keen interest in Jane. They chat excitedly for a while. Once they start liking each other, he tells her he has $250,000 in savings, a $65 an hour job at Cessna, a nice apartment, and 2 cars, including a '69 Dodge Charger. Sounds too good to be true, right? We all thought so, except Jane. They agree to meet for their first date, and he says he'll drive down to see her. But on his way, He claims to get into a serious accident on the interstate and ends up in the hospital. Jane is devastated, and the rest of us, who she was confiding in, suspect he's lying to avoid the date and being exposed as a fraud. We didn't think she'd keep in touch with him after that, but we were wrong. They kept talking. Soon after leaving the hospital, he says he was hit by a car while crossing the street. According to him, life took a turn for the worse. He got laid off from Cessna, his apartment was robbed, and the IRS seized all his money and one of his cars due to a tax issue from years ago. Believable stories, right? To our dismay, Jane brushes it all off and continues talking to him. He starts calling her daily and visiting her at work once a week. Finally, we meet him, and he's the typical loser type with a beer belly, lounging on the couch all day, yelling for his woman to bring him a beer. Despite his claims of wealth, he dresses in oversized clothes, usually sweatpants and flip-flops, hence the nickname flip-flops among us at work. He avoids eye contact when he talks and has a creepy smile. We immediately find him untrustworthy. 3 weeks into their relationship, he shows up at our workplace and proposes to Jane. She happily accepts while we shake our heads in disbelief. He tells us he's landed a new job at Microsoft in his city. We checked. There are no Microsoft jobs there, unless you count selling products at Best Buy. He also claims he's seeing a therapist for anger and jealousy issues. Red flags are waving, but Jane ignores them all. He moves to our town, claiming his family disowned him for wanting to marry a Christian. Supposedly they're devout Catholics, so she'll never meet them. And it gets even weirder. He tells us he's now the head engineer at Exide Manufacturing, making $25 an hour. We verified this. There's no such position. We try to warn Jane, but she dismisses our concerns, saying we're overthinking or just jealous. He starts picking her up and dropping her off at work daily, even for lunch. She believes he's just showing his love, still convinced he has a full-time job. We suspect he just wants to know her whereabouts at all times. After meeting our maintenance man once, he asks him to be his best man. Jane doesn't find this odd. Apparently, Miguel trusts very few people and has no friends of his own. They all supposedly want him for his money. Her parents lend him their spare van for transportation, and shockingly, they're already buying baby clothes and supplies for the couple. They're thrilled their daughter finally found someone, blinded to the fact that she seems stressed and sad lately. By now, if you're still reading, you might think she's just another naive girl falling for a sleazy guy milking her. And you wouldn't be far off. We all thought the same until Jane dropped a bomb on us. He recently told her he used to be in Spec Ops in the Air Force, and they want him back, offering $75,000 for 3 days, 3 weeks, or 3 months of work. The story changes, a detail Jane finds oddly unsuspicious. She agreed, and we suspected he was finding an excuse to end things. Then she drops this bomb. If she wants to stay in touch, they have to marry ASAP and be ready to move away with him. The military has been calling and visiting, explaining she must marry him immediately and prepare to relocate to a secret location where she'll have no contact with friends or family because it's all top secret and she must prove she can be trusted. Now we're all alarmed, everyone except Jane and her family, who are thrilled she's with a military man and proud she's part of something big. The rest of us, the sane ones, are trying to figure out what he's plotting. Is she being lured into human trafficking? Could he harm her? One of us called the human trafficking hotline, and they said it sounds suspiciously familiar but can't act until he makes a move. We're considering involving the police before she gets that call telling her to move. It's all so surreal. We don't know what to expect or how much danger she might really be in. Update. The first time I met Miguel, it was on a busy day at work. We all work in a retail store. Jane and the rest of her department had just finished their work, and they were allowed to go home. I grumbled as I worked in the next department and had to finish my tasks alone. I work right next to the time clock, so I saw Jane clock out. About 10 minutes later, a guy shows up in sweatpants and flip-flops. He smiles strangely at me as he wanders around her department. I continue putting up my work. He walks up to me and hands me a Pepsi. "Can you give this to Jane, please?" "Oh, sorry dude, she just clocked out for the day." "What?" His face dropped as he hurried to the front door. I shrugged it off and continued working. A few minutes later, he comes back, slightly flustered. Her car is still out there. She's still here. I gave him a funny look and stated that I saw her clock out. He stormed off again. A few moments later, he returns, furious. Her car is out there. Where is she? I was a bit alarmed. Jane is pretty large, so I thought it was probably taking her that long to get across the store. Do I need to get a manager on you? Where is Jane? Fortunately for me, my boyfriend showed up at that moment. He expected me to get off at the same time as the rest of my coworkers, so he came in trying to find me. Did you say Jane? I just saw her in the parking lot. Flip-flops stormed out as my boyfriend, and I exchanged WTF looks. The next morning, Miguel showed up at work and proposed to Jane in our stockroom as we were unpacking boxes. My boyfriend laughed when I told him this. He wasn't surprised that Jane was dating that Neanderthal. Looking back on it now, I think the fact that Jane could slip through this guy's grasp and actually do something unnoticed by him freaked him out. He didn't have as much control as he wanted. That might have instigated his proposal, making him want to make sure he had complete control over her. Which is a terrifying thought. Alright, guys, boy was this unexpected for me. As some of you in the comments have seen, I initially tried posting this over a month ago. It, however, kept getting caught in the algorithm of a bot in this forum and was flagged and immediately taken down. No matter how many times I edited it, apparently it was a wall of text. I finally got it approved a few days ago, and that's why it's up here for you to see now. As you can imagine, a lot has happened over the past month, and that's why I'm here now to let you all know just what has happened since. To those who want the short answer, she is fine now, and the situation is nearly completely resolved. The long answer, keep reading. To answer a few questions, I'll start with, to those of you who guessed Wichita, KS, you are mostly correct. Wichita is the city where he's from. Geez, you guys are good. Why not hire a PI? Well, quite frankly, I don't have the kind of money for that. Why don't you and your coworkers all pitch in to get one? Honestly, the majority of my coworkers really don't like Jane. And that's putting it nicely. I know this will sound harsh, but most of them were just counting down the days until they didn't have to see her anymore. She's always had this bad habit of rubbing people the wrong way. Is she a naive girl? Yes. Is she unintelligent? Also, yes. Ever since I've met her, she's always insisted on being the first to give relationship advice, to me and many others, despite having no experience of her own. She's actually the first to throw in her opinion and give advice on most subjects, usually on stuff that she only thinks she knows everything about. She comes off as a know-it-all and is very arrogant. Having done missionary trips in Africa before, she assumes she's seen the worst of humanity, and she's more than knowledgeable about the evil of the world. She also likes to put into the business of everyone, whether she's welcome or not. A few coworkers have tried setting her up on dates before, and when she comes back from them, she is usually furious and gives a lecture on how dare you think he was good enough for me. I would also like to state that this is not solely due to her faith and religion, so you guys can stop using that as an excuse. It does play a part in it, but most of it is due to her own personality, I would say. I'm a Christian also. I was also raised in a very sheltered life. I was homeschooled all throughout high school, and everyone I knew was from our church. I didn't have my first date until I was 20, and he became my first boyfriend. He's an agnostic metalhead, and my parents insisted he go to church with us before he could be approved. He showed up in trip pants, spikes, and studs, and a shirt that boldly read fudge. He was nothing but kind to the congregation, and they had to have a type of intervention with me the next day to make us break up. We are still together to this day, and our 7-year anniversary is this Halloween. I'm very capable of making my own decisions, and my number one rule is to not be unkind. If my religion calls me to be rude, I tell it to back off. I never try to force it on anyone. My beliefs are for me and me alone. I understand common sense and reasoning, and though I've been through hardships, my life is pretty decent. So no, I will not take Jane's religion or sheltered life as an excuse for her ignorance and lack of common sense. Sorry for talking about me. I was just trying to prove a point. Now, with these bits of info, I will continue with the story. Around the same time this story was originally posted, I think the same weekend, it turns out that Jane and Miguel had a secret wedding ceremony at her church and were now married. Yes, there was a certificate and everything, full-blown legally binding marriage. None of his friends or family were present, only Jane's family and their pastor. She hid it from the rest of us for about a week. During these days of us being in the dark, we noticed a lot of mood shifts with her. One day, she would come in beaming and happy, like the world was perfect for her. The next day, we could see the stress and tell something was wrong. A few of us also noted around the same time that both Jane's and Miguel's Facebook accounts had been deleted. He had a recently made account with no pictures of him, just pictures of his nice cars. He rarely used it, and all of his family on the account looked nothing like him. Some of you noticed in the comments that I mentioned him being blondish-haired, blue-eyed, and light though dirty-looking skin. He claims he's Spanish, but all of his family was very distinctly Mexican-looking. We were afraid that he didn't want her, usually overly talkative self, to give too much info about their situation, movements, and whereabouts when he kidnapped her. She confided in a coworker that he had a lot of outbursts, and though he hadn't been violent, he had suddenly become a different person. We tried warning her that he was dangerous, but she assured us that he was just insecure from having been cheated on in so many past relationships, and that it was nothing. Sadly, she was definitely in an abusive relationship. The saddest part is seeing a situation like this and knowing that they can only help themselves at this point when they refuse to listen to everyone else. Jane also had a pet cat that she's had for nearly 8 years up to this point. Miguel was always getting angry at the cat, accusing Jane of loving it more than him, etc. Her cat likes to paw at its food bowl when you pour food into it, and one day as he was trying to feed it, she playfully pawed. He went into a rage, stating that the cat was trying to attack him, and as punishment, it should go without food. For days when Jane would come home from work, she would notice her cat getting more depressed and it would cry a lot more. He would assure Jane that the cat is fine. I've fed it twice today. Don't feed it or it'll get fat. He was trying to starve and was probably abusing her poor cat, and she didn't see this as a sign to leave the jerk. Shortly after these incidents, Jane wound up incredibly sick and had to get rushed to the ER. She had a high fever, but that is the extent that she told us at work. She didn't return for 3 days. We were terrified that he had tried to poison her or something to get rid of her. She didn't find it strange at all that he wasn't at work for the days she was sick at home. It was during this time that word made it to our work that they had been married. She came back to work, seemed to be fine. Around this time, Miguel got a phone call from the military, stating that he had to report to Fort Scott for top-secret weapons testing, and shortly after this, they would have to prepare for their big move. I dare you to look up Fort Scott, Kansas and see if that seems like the kind of place that would do super dangerous top-secret military weapons testing. I couldn't begin to tell you how many lies he's told that could be easily disproven by a simple Google search. She never questioned him about any of this. Unfortunately for him, the family van of hers that he'd been driving had broken down on his way to the test site, and her father had to come bring him home. By pure luck, the military called afterwards and told him that the equipment he was testing had exploded and killed a few men, so he was so lucky to have not turned up that day. They changed his plans, and his next top secret mission would be next April, and it would be then that he and Jane would get to move. With this said, I would like to point out that I do get along with Jane. I do understand some of where she's coming from, and I don't blame the rest of my coworkers one bit for not liking her. A few of us still agree, though, that as annoying as she can be, and despite how foolish she's being, she still doesn't deserve to be murdered or trafficked or whatever would happen to her. So for those of us that cared, we were glad that we at least had until April to figure out what we could do. To continue from here, I will explain that before they were married, Jane was surprisingly good at keeping to her beliefs. Miguel had to live with another man from Jane's church, and not with her, so as to keep their marriage bed sacred and to not be tempted. Miguel made it abundantly clear to Jane that he hated these arrangements and would try to start fights whenever it was made clear he wasn't going to get intimate anytime soon. A week or so after the van broke down, a letter arrived at the house of the man Miguel had been staying with. It was inquiring about why he had missed the court date for giving away his parental rights back to his wife. Fortunately, this man from the church actually had common sense, so he met up with one of Jane's sisters to discuss what to do. Despite all of her family fully loving and supporting the couple, one of her sisters was actually hesitant and showed some doubts. There's a sign of intelligent life after all. Jane's sister used this information to find Miguel's wife on Facebook and talk to her, while the church man ran a $30 background check on Miguel. A free background check had been run on him before, but nothing suspicious turned up. Surprisingly, this one also turned up nothing. He had to shell out $200 for a real background check that safely showed how much of what Miguel had said about himself was complete nonsense. Miguel had been married twice up to this point. He had 4 children with his first wife, and they both had given up custody of the kids, who were now living with Miguel's parents, the real reason that Jane was never going to meet his family. He had 1 child with his most recent wife, and they had just gotten divorced. Their divorce was finalized a few days before Miguel and Jane's wedding. Sadly, this is all the information that we co-workers were able to find out that turned up in the background check. No one has told us anything else. Jane's sister printed out copies of the marriage certificates, and they got the church together to show them to Jane. They were all able to convince her that Miguel was a lying scoundrel and helped kick him out of the house. He denied all of it until he was hauled away to a psych ward for suicide watch that night. He was released a few days later after proving himself sane. Jane issued a no-contact order and has cut off all communication with him as she proceeds to get an annulment. Jane was devastated for about a week, but she's mostly over it now. Gee, it's almost as though she was only really in love with the idea of this man's money and valor, and not him himself. The hardest part of the situation was dealing with the blow to her ego, knowing how naive she had been. Sadly, this didn't last very long, as she now boldly tells everyone the tale of how strong she is for getting through all of this and how resilient she was. She assures everyone that Miguel was a master con artist, and he was able to fool everyone. Her family and church support her in all of these claims, as they were all deceived too. To this day, I don't think she really learned anything valuable from this situation. Just that she likes having everyone pat her on the back and tell her how courageous she is. I apologize for making you all lose your faith in humanity. I assure you, mine is now gone too. For anyone still claiming that this story is fake, I tell you one thing: I believe in strong female heroines. This story goes against everything I've ever held dear to my beliefs. I would never make this up, because I wouldn't want people to think anyone was capable of being this naive. I apologize to anyone who was hoping for a more scary outcome, but this is just how it all went down. To try to answer, or not answer, a few more questions, I'll just discuss a bit more on the subject. The only thing that Jane and her church really care about is that Miguel had lied about being married. To this day, I can't find out what his plans were once they disappeared in April. She is still maintaining no contact with him, so I cannot find out this information. Jane's just too distraught over the fact that he wasn't the 35-year-old virgin of her dreams to care about any danger she could have been in. So I'm unsure if it will ever be answered if this man is a murderer or involved in human trafficking or whatever. All we know is that he is definitely a lazy person, a deadbeat dad, and a manipulative jerk. And foolish. Very, very foolish. We also believe that he genuinely believes all of his lies, since he was so insistent on all of them being true up until court time, as far as we can see. So definitely thinking some kind of mental problems in there. I haven't heard of the Dirty John podcast before, but I'll definitely make time to listen. It does sound interesting. Maybe I can have her listen too, to see if she actually learned something from all of this. Now, purely for your amusement, I will compile a list of some of the lies he's told her that she believed wholeheartedly that haven't been mentioned. He's a black belt in many martial arts, which supposedly helped him achieve high ranks in the military, etc. He offered to try teaching her karate once, but she injured herself right at the start, and no attempts have been made since. He's also claimed to be a world championship gamer, with Halo being his top game. He said he excels in many games, but I don't remember the list she rattled off. He's allegedly won numerous competitions and as a result has been involved in the development of several other Halo games and has many ties to Microsoft, which supposedly helped him easily secure jobs there before. At one point, Jane did see a letter from him in the mail about owing child support. Upon questioning him, he assured her that he was not responsible and had previously adopted the child of a former girlfriend of his. He claimed to love the child dearly and believed it needed a father figure. During a summer festival in town, he was allegedly offered over $200 a day to assist with setup. Other coworkers who worked at this volunteer event had never heard of him. One day, she came home to find him not working at the festival. He claimed he had to leave due to heat stroke. She rushed him to the ER, where they stayed for hours, but no signs of heat stroke were found despite their efforts. She spent days nursing him back to health while he was bedridden. I think it was the '69 Dodge Charger he claimed he had at the beginning of the story, which was involved in the car accident he also mentioned. He supposedly had to make a sudden trip back home to Wichita one day, claiming he was picking up the Charger from an impound lot. Jane was excited, wanting to fix it up, and couldn't wait to show it off and drive it around. Later that same day, he called and said it was too damaged, so he had to scrap it for parts and the money had to go towards the impound fees. Jane was crushed. About a month later, when I saw him driving around in her family's car, I mentioned that if he no longer had any vehicle of his own, the IRS would have to give him back one of his cars. Suddenly, it turned out that the Charger wasn't scrapped at all. It was actually being refurbished in Jane's favorite colors and was going to be a wedding gift to her. Oh, happy day! Eventually, he did secure a part-time job at a factory in town after lying for days about his non-existent job at Exide and told Jane he was offered $45 an hour as their head engineer in charge of maintenance. Coincidentally, that position was already held by another coworker's husband, small towns, and he certainly doesn't make $45 an hour, closer to $20. She didn't want to burst Jane's bubble, so she never confronted him about it. The 3 days she was absent from work coincided with his start at this factory job. When she asked why he was home, he claimed he went to work, but they didn't have his contact information to inform him that he wasn't starting that day. Because it was their mistake, he was allowed to clock in and go home, so he wasn't losing any money. Edit AH. Upon talking to Jane yesterday, she now considers herself an expert in identifying early signs of an abusive relationship and wants to write a book on the subject. I think it's a great idea. There aren't really any books out there on abusive relationships, and I would love to be the voice of it. She says, being a writer, I cringe at the very thought. I apologize if I sound bitter. I might just be more disgusted than bitter, but, man,